The core element trinivantium was established to be the ultimate power source that produced no dangerous waste and was found on an asteroid in the late 2100s. For years, scientists and explorers looked to find the element in abundance so it could be mined and sent back to the world to give humankind a new era of clean, powerful energy. On a planet in the Alpha Centauri system, they found it. So with the promise of extreme wealth, various corporations began a race to mine the vital power source, and with it came corruption, greed, and a struggle for power. The planet became a mining colony, and within the conflicting conglomerates, two rose to the top, Xylos and the TVT Corporation. Each had their own designated zone in which they staked a claim. Some areas were richer in trinivantium than others. Money and power was to be made, and no quarter was to be given to the losers. At first glance, everything about the droid looked human, right down to its facial features, but it had no AI, no mind of its own. It was totally controlled from a bunker on the West Hill. It was dressed in urban camouflage, carried an assault projectile weapon, and had provision for night vision, heat seeker, and infrared. In essence, it was a walking land drone as opposed to a flight drone to carry out the job of boots on the ground clearance work. Its call sign was C. It wasn't alone. Drones, K and P, were also tasked with the job of clearing the remnants of a bombed zone known to be held by representatives of the TVT, Mining and Exploration Corporation. The operators of the droids worked for rival corporation Xylos and sat in a secret air-conditioned underground complex under a hospital. Droid C, operated by a young female operator named Walker, moved with quick efficiency towards a closed door of a bombed-out house and moved inside, securing itself behind cover as not to be seen from the street. Droids K and P, similarly operated by Defoe, a 30-year-old male, and Kudishini, a 22 cocky young man, respectively, did likewise on the opposite side of the debris-strewn street. Walker, eyes glued to the screen in front of her, turned up the volume on her headphones. Defoe turned to her.
"What are we expecting here, Walker?"
"Trouble."
"I guessed that."
"Keep your eyes on the screen. Defoe, you know better than that,"
said the rather stern, serious voice of Security Officer Hanley, an experienced man in his late 40s.
"Sorry, Gov."
"That goes for you too, Kudishini. No time to lose your concentration."
Kudishini ignored him. He despised the old git. Walker suddenly held on to her right headphone as if to hear better.
"Contact, I can hear it. Here it comes, people."
"All right, stay sharp and stay cool and thoughtful,"
Hanley stated as he watched a main overview screen set in front of him. Each operator had their own screen, which showed what their own particular droid could see through their camera, which stood in for eyes. On the ground, a group of 7 battle-ready TVT representatives, also known as TIFTs, moved into view, all armed with the latest assault weapons.
"Now where the hell did they get those?"
Hanley said aggressively.
"Someone is bloody funding them,"
said Defoe.
"Stay focused, Defoe."
"Yes, Governor."
Kudishini moved his droid to ready his weapon.
"Wait, Kudishini, I'll tell you when."
Kudishini rolled his eyes. Walker's hands began to sweat. Defoe wiped spittle off his mouth. Hanley watched intently. Kudishini fidgeted, eager. On the ground, the TIFTs moved stealthily through the street. One of them sensed something was up. Hanley knew it when he saw it. He shouted,
"Now!"
The droids on the ground broke cover, and a hail of bullets spat ferociously through the urban street and tore into the surprised TIFTs. Only one managed to get a shot off before the debris-strewn street was covered in blood, guts, and the now remnants of the TIFTs' patrol. All 7 lay dead. Hanley looked on the big screen as if watching a Friday night game in the bar. The operators showed varying reactions. Kudishini smiled as though he completed a level on his favorite video game. Defoe looked at the clock, hoping it was soon time for his lunch break, and Walker wiped her sweating palms on her trousers. Hanley watched her.
"You okay, Walker?"
"Swell."
"You know the drill. If this is becoming a little overwhelming at any time, you need to see the MO.
"I'm okay, sir."
Be sure that you are. I'm here to help."
"Yes, sir."
"What now, Gov?"
"We wait."
The crew waited. A door at the far end of the room opened. A figure entered and approached Hanley.
"Everything okay, Hanley?"
The figure was team leader Yallop.
"Yes, sir. The operation seems to have been a success.
Yallop nodded.
I'm glad to hear it, Hanley. We could not have afforded any more fuck-ups.
No, sir.
Good. I'm glad you see it to my way of thinking.
Of course, sir.
I've finished my watch, Hanley, so I'll leave things in your capable hands.
Yes, sir, of course.
Any problems, you know where to find me.
Of course, sir.
Can I rely on you?
Yes, of course, sir. Have a good evening, sir.
Yallop turned to leave.
You'll not be missed.
Hanley said under his breath as Yallop left the room.
Yallop walked along a long winding corridor and stopped at an elevator. He waited and entered the elevator when the doors opened. Checking his watch, he hummed tunelessly as the elevator rose, stopped, and the doors opened. He went to leave when the muzzle of a sawn-off shotgun appeared in his face. Yallop glared at the assailant. The assailant was wearing urban camouflage gear and their face was covered by a balaclava.
Move.
Yallop moved, but secretly put his hand into his pocket to press a personal alarm connected to the operation room and Hanley's team. The assailant shook their head and grabbed Yallop's hand. The assailant smiled as he pressed the muzzle of the weapon deep into Yallop's cheek.
Don't push your luck.
Mackenzie, a man in his early 30s, stood in fatigues, staring at a broken portable navigation tracker console and 7 electronic dog tags removed from their owners after death. On a makeshift table in a hastily constructed underground bunker. He was tired, dejected, and close to tears. A woman, Saffron, late 20s, entered the room and viewed Mackenzie, noticing his mood. She stopped and realized what he may be contemplating.
It wasn't your fault.
Aye, that's easy for you to say.
Drones don't show up on the trackers, Mac.
Have you heard from the company?
No. I heard from Bullard, though.
And
He, says he's got something you might want to hear.
Mackenzie nodded absently, his mind still on the disastrous patrol and his friends that were lost.
He said you will want to hear this.
yeah, okay, what's it about, did he say?
No.
Mackenzie nodded, picked up his assault weapon and followed Saffron out of the room.
In a compound surrounded by high fencing, makeshift fabricated walls with parapets and various types and models of tracked military equipment, stood a small transport vehicle. At its side, a couple of nefarious-looking men stood leaning against the vehicle, dragging on artificial stimulant inhalers. One of the men was very distinctive. The black eye patch he sported could have easily been from a bygone age. His name was Zinchenko. The other man was older and smaller, but heavily built. He went by the name of Pucks. Mackenzie followed closely behind by Saffron, exited the ramshackle shelter that doubled as a headquarters, and viewed the men. Scattered around the compound were various Tifta security guards dressed in military fatigues. One, named Bullard, a wiry young man in his 20s, was watching close by, all the time cleaning his assault rifle as if purposefully making a point to the two newcomers. Mackenzie approached Bullard.
Saffron said you got something to show me.
Bullard nodded and indicated the new arrivals.
They said they wanted to make a deal with us.
Mackenzie viewed the men.
Who the fuck are they?
Bullard shrugged.
Look like freelance contractors to me, but they could be anyone, working for anyone.
What's your first instinct say that?
They're full of shit. Thing is, they must know we're in bad shape.
Mackenzie looked to Saffron, who was now standing a few yards back, keeping her distance.
She's skeptical.
She always is.
Mackenzie took a few moments to contemplate the situation. He shared a look with Bullard and stepped towards the men. He stopped a few yards off.
State your business.
The man in the eye patch spoke.
Well, we're just opportunists, really. You know, out here trying to eke out a living.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, well, we don't work for any particular company. Don't have any loyalties to any shareholders.
So how do you come to be this far out?
Well, we were prospectors.
Yeah.
Pucks nodded vigorously.
They said there would be gold and riches beyond our wildest dreams. A veritable land of milk and honey, wine and roses. Instead, all we found was misery, desperation, death.
Mackenzie eyed Pucks. He did not look like a man to trust.
So what do you want here?
Might have something for you.
Yes, for a nominal fee, of course.
Pucks grinned.
What is it?
Zinchenko moved to the transporter door and yanked the door open. Inside, tied and gagged, was Yallop with another man. Mackenzie, a little shocked, glared at Zinchenko and then Pucks. He could tell straight away the tied-up men in the transport were Xylo's men.
Who are they and why'd you bring them here?
Zinchenko ran his hand over his short-cropped hair and looked to Pucks, whose grin had faded.
You know who they are?
Zinchenko adjusted his eye patch.
Well, like I said, we're opportunists, and out here, you have to know what's what and who's who to survive. We know your operation took a bit of a blow this morning, and we know that these gentlemen might know something.
With a little persuasion, of course.
Puck's grin was back, but this time with menace.
Not interested.
Mackenzie was firm and forthright.
Yeah, well, maybe it'll be in all our interests if the Xylos Corporation's underground bunker was how should we say, discovered.
Why does it matter to you?
We're prospectors. We don't like rules and regulations.
Mackenzie could not get over his gut instinct not to trust these men, but he was between a rock and a hard place. He needed to know how the Xylos company was finding his operatives, and where they were operating their drones from. These men might be able to find that information, but at what cost?
Excuse me, gentlemen, while I confer with my colleagues.
Pucks laughed. Zinchenko smiled.
Well, of course, General. I'm all for a democracy.
Mackenzie gave Zinchenko a look, not appreciating his sarcastic attitude. Mackenzie stepped back towards Saffron, out of earshot of the two prospectors, and was joined by Bullard.
What do you think?
I don't trust him.
That goes without saying, but...
It's all well and good, Mac, to find out where Xylos are operating their drones from, but you know as well as I do it'll be well protected.
Yeah, he's right, Mac. Even if we did know where they were, doesn't mean we can get to them or do anything about it.
I know.
Mackenzie was a little dejected.
Any ideas, though?
You're the boss.
Like the man said, I like to be democratic.
Are you taking the piss?
Bullard let out a short laugh.
She's right since fucking when?
Mackenzie smiled for the first time in a while.
So it's no go then?
Well, I can't see what else we can do. If they do find out where the drone operator bunker is, firstly, we don't know if we can do anything about it. And secondly, what the fuck are they gonna want for their help? They don't look particularly charitable characters.
Looks can be deceiving.
Fuck off, Mac. Look at them. They look like they'd cut your throat for a $5.
That's only because one of them's got an eye patch.
Yeah, but why? Technology has moved on since the 1600s. It's just for effect.
You're not very trusting, are you, Saffron? Could be he's lost an eye.
Saffron shrugged. Bullard frowned.
Who gives a fuck? You're missing the point. What are we going to do?
I say let's hear them out. Ask them straight, what do they want, and tell them we aren't equipped at this very moment to attack a heavily defended bunker.
Is that wise?
Get real, bully, mate. They wouldn't be here if they didn't know our situation.
Yeah, but what do they want in return?
Let's find out.
The trio moved towards the two men at the transporter. Zinchenko and Pucks looked up from their own little conference.
Well?
What do you want? I mean, you must have realized we're not in great shape at the moment, and you obviously have a reason to bring us these men to interrogate.
Zinchenko and Pucks shared looks.
With the Xylos Corporation's little mining operation is kind of interfering with our own little project, as it were. It would just benefit us if that mining operation had a setback.
Yeah,
interjected Pucks.
It would give us just enough time to do what we have to do and get the hell out of town.
So you know our enemy's enemy is our best friend kind of thing.
Saffron still eyed these men with deep suspicion.
Yeah, but if the bunker is heavily defended, it won't matter where it is. We don't have the resources to do anything about it.
It isn't.
Isn't what?
Heavily defended. It's an underground bunker.
How do you know that, and what do you need these men for?
Pucks moved forward.
We know it's an underground bunker, but we don't know where.
And we also know of a technology that may be able to access the bunker without loss of life.
Mackenzie eyed the two men.
You're talking in fucking riddles. Just get to the fucking punchline.
Zinchenko smiled and shared looks with Pucks.
Okay, cards on the table. We know it's an underground bunker, but not where. We know it'll not be easily accessed by traditional ground troops, and the sort of resources needed to disable the bunker are unique and never tried before.
You're still not making yourself very clear.
It'll be easier if we show you.
Saffron rolled her eyes.
It's a trap.
Zinchenko for the first time started to lose his cool.
Well, I'll put it in simple fucking terms, shall I? We both want the Xylos Corporation's activities in this sector to stop, but neither of us have the capabilities to enact such an operation on our own. We know they operate from a secret underground bunker, but don't know where it is. We know where we can get the resources to enact the cessation of Xylos' operations, but we need help getting them. You know my enemy's enemy is my friend, yes? Now do you get it, or do you want me to draw a fucking picture?
Mackenzie stared at Zinchenko and slowly nodded.
Yeah.
He turned and looked at Saffron and Bullard. Saffron shrugged.
You're the boss.
Repeated Bullard. Mackenzie turned back to Zinchenko.
Okay, let's do it.
In a row of old transport containers, renovated into temporary living quarters, a door opened to one of the containers, and a guy in his 40s, disheveled and yawning, appeared at the doorway with a look of resignation. Matthews was not physically tired, but mentally tired. The truth he had been hiding from his employers, the Xylos Corporation, was that he was mentally shot, but he couldn't say because he wouldn't get paid and would be quickly dispatched on a transport back to the world. He wasn't sure which was worse. He was not sure he could face life back in the world again. So here he was, taking things by the day and leaning on whatever artificial stimulants he could get hold of just to survive. He wasn't sure if there was any long-term side effects, but he considered that was the least of his worries. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he descended the steps and made his way towards a quad bike in the corner of the living quarters compound. He was stopped in his tracks by a loud beeping from a communication device. Fishing deep into his pocket, he pulled out the device and answered it.
Hello, Matthews.
Hello, Hanley.
May I ask what you are doing at this precise moment?
Talking to you, Hanley.
Change of plan, stuff. You're wanted at the hospital.
The hospital?
Yes, the hospital.
Any particular reason?
Yes, to meet me there and get your new instructions from me.
Okay now?
Now.
The communicator cut off. Matthews stared at it for a moment, shrugged and placed it back in his pocket.
Stoker was a large, imposing figure, ex-Marine, and looked every bit the part. He stood at the doorway to a row of cells that made up the holding section for the criminal fraternity of the mining colony that were to be extradited to a more secure penitentiary either back on the world or a space station somewhere in between. It all depended on the severity of the crime committed. He waited, a little impatiently, though it didn't show for the prisoner escort to arrive. A salty-looking dude named Edwards. Edwards had a languid appearance at first sight, but when he had to, he would surprise many with his ability to move quickly and effectively.
Alarm clock broken, Edwards?
No, Stoker, just late on purpose just to piss you off.
Stoker nodded.
It worked.
What we got?
2. One of them you know.
Goldstein?
Yep, and Westwood.
Edwards looked incredulous.
And Westwood?
Yep.
Stoker smiled.
You done this on purpose, haven't you?
Well, you're just so capable, Edwards.
Edwards grinned.
Well, Stoker, my old buddy, I wouldn't look so smug, 'cause you've pulled escort duty with me.
Stoker's smile dropped.
Need someone to hold your hand, Edwards?
Well, it's just you're so capable, Stoker.
Edwards grinned.
Ready when you are?
I was born ready.
Really?
Stoker laughed.
Ever ready, Eddie?
Edwards smiled. They moved through the doorway to the holding cells, and both prisoners were laid on their respective bunks in their respective cells.
Are you ready, gentlemen?
Stoker produced an electronic keypad from his pocket and unlocked Westwood's cell.
You first, Westwood.
Oh, I see I'm first, yes? May that be because I'm an innocent man, by God?
Innocent man? You ain't never been an innocent man, Westwood.
Now, that's not very nice.
Just get in line.
Westwood got up from his bunk like a soldier ordered to stand to attention and exaggeratedly got into line. He stamped his heels together and stood straight. There was a hostile barb at authority within his tone and his actions.
Sir! Yes, sir!
He yelled.
Don't push your luck, Westwood.
No, sir! Whatever you say, sir!
Edwards and Stoker shared a look. Stoker used the keypad to unlock Goldstein's cell. Goldstein was less immediately aggressive, but not less hostile.
You're not telling me I have to share transport with that nutcase?
I thought you were best buds.
Well, you thought wrong, Stoker.
Stoker grabbed some handcuffs from his pocket and slapped them on Goldstein's wrist before he could react.
How the hell have I got these and he ain't?
'Cause Edwards here is escorting Westwood and I'm escorting you. And I don't trust you.
Goldstein glared at Stoker and Stoker glared right back. Goldstein smiled and...
You know from you I take that as a compliment.
Stoker grinned.
Take it however you want to take it, but if you give me shit, I'll kick your fucking ass from here to the old world.
I'd like to see you try.
Well, hell, maybe I'll just do it anyway, just for fun.
Goldstein returned the grin.
Anytime you're ready, Stoker.
Edwards was getting a little edgy.
Come on, let's get going, you two. I want this over and done with.
He stopped for a moment and eyed the leering Westwood. Goldstein's comment about Westwood being a nutcase kept running through his mind. Better safe than sorry, he mused, and he pulled a pair of cuffs from his back pocket and slapped them on Westwood's wrists.
Now, there's no need for that, Mr. Edwards. I tell ya, I'm an innocent man.
You've had 3 juries now, Westwood, that think different.
I can't help it if they've all got it in for me now, can I?
Just get moving, Westwood.
Edwards pushed Westwood forwards and he reluctantly obliged.
Westwood and Goldstein were loaded into a transporter ready for transportation to the shuttle that led them off the colony to face their sentencing at the Midway space station. It still hung in the balance if the Secretary of Law Enforcement for the Uni Party would decide on commuting a death sentence and give them long-term prison sentences or give the go-ahead for their execution. It all depended on her mood on the day, though the general consensus of opinion was she would have them face the most painful form of execution. Some believed in making an example of the pair to discourage others, but most believed that the Secretary of Law Enforcement was just an evil, twisted, psychopathic, power-crazed bitch. And she was. Stoker secured the pair into their seats.
And why do you feel the need to do that, Stoker?
Safety first, so you don't fly out of your seat if we crash.
I never realized you were so considerate.
Of course, I've always got your best interests at heart.
Stoker took a seat near the front and shared a look with Edwards.
Not likely to get any trouble, are we?
Keep your eyes on those two. Desperate men with nothing to lose are capable of anything.
A windowless container in complete darkness inside. 2 men sat tied and gagged in opposite corners. Xylo's security chief Yallop and a younger security man Andrews. The bondings were tight, uncomfortable, and at the wrists and ankles were severely sore. Andrews was dozing in and out of sleep, but Yallop was too uncomfortable and was running things through his mind. What did he do wrong? Could he have done something different? What is he going to do now? What do they want? And most of all, what are they going to do to him? He could sense Andrews but couldn't see him or communicate with him and had no idea if he was okay. He could hear movement outside the container. Quite often it sounded as though someone was going to open the doors and come in, but every time nothing materialized. God, he was hungry and so thirsty, but he guessed that maybe that was part of the plan to make things as uncomfortable as possible for the captives. He literally had no idea of time. Eventually, after some rattling on the double doors, one of the doors opened and a nighttime power light hung from another container nearby, illuminated the interior of the captive's holding container. 2 figures entered. One was the guy with the eye patch who had been the main instigator of the kidnapping, and another man. This guy, Yallop did not recognize, but it was dark and a murky mist drifted into the container. The man with the eye patch moved towards Yallop. Zinchenko bellowed,
"Get up!"
Yallop did nothing. Zinchenko leant down and grabbed Yallop by the wrist restraints, causing Yallop to let out a small yelp of pain as the skin on his wrists had become scarred. Zinchenko then slammed him against the side of the container.
Take the gag off.
Mackenzie watched, not overly convinced by Zinchenko's methods.
I'll do what the fuck I like.
Zinchenko dragged Yallop out of the container and into the floodlit courtyard of Zinchenko's prospector's yard.
What about him?
Mackenzie said, referring to Andrew still unconscious in the container. Zinchenko smiled.
Insurance, just in case.
Zinchenko shoved Yallop to the floor. Pucks walked up to the man, sat on the ground, and kicked him. Yallop cried out in pain again, and Pucks ungagged Yallop.
Who are you?
Yallop spluttered. Zinchenko turned to Pucks and...
Go and get him, Pucks.
Pucks walked to the far end of the yard and walked up some steps to a unit and knocked. Then entered. Zinchenko, Mackenzie, and Yallop all looked towards the unit and for Pucks to reappear. The outlined silhouette of a taller, more imposing figure appeared within the doorframe. It wasn't Pucks. The new figure slowly descended the steps and walked towards Zinchenko. Mackenzie could not see the man's face, but as he reached Zinchenko, the light from the flood lamp on the back wall illuminated his face for the first time. Mackenzie recognized the face, but couldn't put a name to him. Zinchenko did it.
He wants to know who we are, Zimbo.
Zimbo? Mackenzie mused. Of course, Pascal Zimmerman, organized crime boss back on the world. What the hell was he doing here? Not a man to be crossed, so he had heard anyway. Mackenzie thought before that something was not how it should be. But now he was certain things were taking a very bad turn. He started running things through his mind and made a promise to himself to be aware of every opportunity to be careful. Zimmerman looked at Yallop sitting on the floor and...
I think we should make this as simple and as easy as possible, don't you?
Jesus, I don't know what you're talking about.
The droids used?
Zimmerman pointed at Mackenzie.
to kill this man's colleagues.
Don't know what you're talking about.
Zimmerman smiled.
Pucks, go get Andrews.
Pucks went to the holding container. Zimmerman turned to Zinchenko.
Bring him.
Zinchenko grabbed Yallop by the wrists again making him yelp. Zimmerman turned and moved back towards his unit. Zinchenko nodded to Mackenzie to follow them, and they all went to Zimmerman's unit. Inside the unit, it was a much more comfortable and plusher interior to the dilapidated appearance of the exterior. Zimmerman switched on a huge ACCTV monitor that enveloped nearly a whole side of an interior wall and sat on a plush chair behind his desk. He signaled to Zinchenko to place Yallop seated in front of the screen, and for Zinchenko and Mackenzie to make themselves at home. They all watched the screen as Pucks dragged Andrews from the holding container and threw him to the floor in the middle of the yard. Pucks then strode to a specialized-looking container at the far end of the yard. Mackenzie wondered what the hell was going on, and Yallop was thinking exactly the same. Zinchenko watched their bemusement in mild amusement. They'd enjoy this, he mused. Puck stood on top of the waist-high container, which had air vents, and led up a catch opening a door at the front, facing the gagged and bleary-eyed Andrews. Something, slightly obscured by the dark shadows and mist in the yard, moved out of the container. Inside the hut, Mackenzie squinted to try and make out what the form was.
What the fuck is it?
The ultimate killing machine, Mr. Mackenzie. Are you familiar with the works of Dr. Robert Schoenderbeck in the early part of the 21st century?
I'm aware, but not familiar.
Very clever man. Genetic modification developed by the Van Cleef Corporation. A super soldier. No remorse, consciousness, or...
delusions of morality.
Mackenzie finished the sentence.
You are aware of the work, then?
No, just heard that reference before somewhere.
They can lift 20 times their own body weight, and can rip and tear anything with their mandibles, and have the ability to spray or inject formic acid with a powerful stinger in their rear.
How many of them are there?
We have 4 at the moment,
interjected Zinchenko. The room's occupants watched as 2 of the organic killing machines moved towards Andrews, sensing everything around them as they did. Andrews tried to pull back in terror and struggled with his bindings, but he was helpless as the knee-high mutations attacked with relentless ferocity, ripping and tearing the manacled man to shreds. Zinchenko smiled. Zimmerman looked towards the terrorized form of Yallop sitting shell-shocked in front of the big screen.
The original mutations apparently were much larger, but these have been developed with the intention of fitting in the air ducts of underground bunkers and seeking out its prey. And of course they are carnivorous, if that hadn't become immediately apparent. So, Mr. Yallop, where is the Xylos underground bunker from where the droids were controlled?
You bastard!
Zinchenko, introduce Mr. Yallop to our friends.
Zinchenko grabbed Yallop, yanked him to his feet and dragged him towards the door. Yallop tried to resist. Mackenzie looked on. Who had he aligned himself with? He hated the Xylos Corporation, but who were these lot? Were they acting independently, or did they have someone directing their activities? Where did these mutations come from? Yallop screamed protestation. Zinchenko was younger and stronger, and Yallop was still cuffed.
Mr. Yallop?
Zinchenko stopped at the door threshold.
Last chance, because you set foot out in the yard. There will be no changing your mind.
Conflicting reactions and thoughts filled Yallop's head. He looked out of the door at the mutations devouring the remains of Andrews. He broke and stopped struggling.
Okay. It's under a hospital on the west side.
Zimmerman smiled. He turned to Mackenzie.
Do you know it?
Mackenzie nodded.
Yeah, I know it. It makes total sense now I think about it.
Zimmerman nodded and grinned.
You're not telling us porkies now, are you, Yallop?
For fuck's sake, no.
Zimmerman shared a look with Zinchenko.
Get him out of here.
Zinchenko grinned, lifted Yallop up and threw him out of the hut door and down the steps and onto the dusty yard floor. He then locked and bolted the hut door. On the big screen in the hut, Mackenzie watched Pucks, still standing on the roof of the mutations container, dance a little jig. What the fuck is wrong with these people, Mackenzie mused. Yallop struggled to his feet. The mutations' antennae began to twitch as they sensed movement, prey, nutrition.
No.
Yallop muttered under his breath. The mutations began to move towards him, slowly at first. Yallop made a desperate run for the locked compound gate. The mutations were on him in seconds, and his bone-chilling screams were extreme, but short-lived. Ripped limb from limb, the mutations were quick to devour the former boss of the Xylos operations bunker. Mackenzie watched with mixed feelings. He hated Xylos, that much was true, and these guys had the ability and resources to destroy the hidden bunker and eradicate Xylos's control of the sector. And it would be perfect justice for his 7 fallen comrades, but at what cost? What would these people want, and how many people inside the hospital would die and be classed as collateral damage? And how would he persuade Saffron and Bullard that what they were doing was in their best interests? Still, he mused, that was the lot for being in command. Difficult decisions were his proviso for being the boss, as Bullard always said.
Now that you've opened Pandora's box, what do you do now?
Mackenzie watched the mutations demolish what was left of Yallop. Zimmerman took a deep intake of breath.
Stridulations.
Stridulations?
Stridulations.
Zimmerman opened a communication console on his desk.
Pucks, when you're ready.
Pucks gave the thumbs up from the top of the container and produced something from his pocket, and within seconds the mutations left what was left of Yallop and seemed to obediently return to the container, and Pucks closed the door.
The copter drone hovered above the grey weatherproofed installation. The hospital, placed out here on the colony on the west side of the planet, was not built for cosmetic beauty, but purely for practical purposes, for a workforce working on the mining for valuable minerals for use back on the world. It didn't matter who the miners and support staff worked for. It was meant for all colony workers. So the fact that, before his brutal death, Yallop had claimed there was an operations bunker owned by the Xylos Corporation under the hospital had caused no little surprise or consternation from Mackenzie, Saffron and Bullard as they watched the images transmitted from the drone onto Zimmerman's wall screen. Saffron particularly felt more than a little uneasy. There was definitely something about Zimmerman, Zinchenko and Pucks that gave her the creeps. Mackenzie didn't feel any better about it, but he knew there was no going back now. With Zimmerman sat in his executive chair behind his desk, Zinchenko stood watching the screen, directing Pucks with the drone remote controller as it circled the hospital. There was an uncomfortable silence.
Have you ever been to this hospital, you lot?
Mackenzie and Saffron shook their heads. Bullard hesitated for a moment.
I have.
Do you see anything that looked unusual?
Yeah. The elevator to the lower floors were not marked. I thought at the time it must have been where they kept the spare medical equipment, but I thought it was still unusual not to be marked. I commented at the time, and the porter said he'd never been down there and didn't know anyone who had.
Zinko, check out who built the hospital.
Zinchenko went to a computer terminal and tapped away at the touchscreen, stared at the screen for a few moments and nodded with a wry smile.
You can guess, can't you?
Now, explain.
It was built by a contractor from back on the world, but the donor who funded it was a Uniparty backer named Furuhashi.
Sounds familiar.
Mackenzie looked towards Zimmerman.
That's because he was married to the daughter of a director on the board of the Xylos Corporation.
Zimmerman nodded.
Thought I recognized the name.
Doesn't mean anything,
Saffron interjected. The occupants of the room all turned to give her a look. She shrugged.
Yeah, okay, it stinks.
So how do we find out for sure, and if it is underneath, how do we get in there with your friends?
I have full medical accreditation. Mackenzie and Bullard here has been in there before.
Could you convincingly find your way around Bully?
Bullard looked at Mackenzie, then at Zimmerman, and after a moment nodded.
Yeah.
Well, there we go then. Every hospital has an emergency room, yes?
The trolley crashed through the hospital doors. Zimmerman and Saffron, both dressed in paramedic uniform, maneuvered the trolley to the emergency triage unit. An administrator, complete with clipboard, approached them.
Private contractors?
Zimmerman nodded and passed over his medical accreditation. The administrator scanned it briefly.
Okay, what's the situation?
Mining accident.
The administrator looked at Saffron, who tried to look as professional as possible. She then took a quick look at the patient on the trolley. It was Bullard.
A level 4 emergency rating, yeah?
Yes.
Approximately 2 hours wait at the moment.
Okay.
If you'd like to go to Bay 12, please.
The administrator moved away. Zimmerman and Saffron shared a look.
2 hours?
Saffron tried not to look out of place.
That's enough.
Nodded Zimmerman, and the pair moved the trolley and Bullard to Bay 12. Out in the hospital compound, Zinchenko sat in the medical transporter. technical console on his lap, Pucks and Mackenzie in the back. Pucks opened the window and out flew a microdrone with a camera. Mackenzie watched the microdrone's camera on a screen on his lap. The microdrone was almost undetectable and most mistook it for a plantoid microlife form. Pucks navigated the microdrone over to the hospital doors, waited for them to open and flew it inside. He quietly spoke into a communicator.
It's in.
Saffron received the message through her receiver in her ear and gave Zimmerman a look. He nodded and peered out of the bay. The hospital staff were busy scurrying around.
You ready?
Saffron nodded. She swiftly moved out of the bay and approached a nurse busy at a desk. Experienced and world-weary, Nurse Fuller looked up from her work.
Yes? Have you a staff restroom I can use?
Fuller looked her over. Her instinct immediately sensed there was something very unmedically professional about her.
Yes.
She pointed down a long corridor and...
Down there on the right.
Okay, thank you.
Fuller watched her go, still suspicious. Saffron entered the restroom and locked the door. She switched on a secret micro-communicator.
I'll need a diversion.
Zimmerman responded as if he was talking to Bullard.
Why?
The nurse at the desk. I think her name is Fuller. Mid-40s, looks a bit of an authority figure.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Zimmerman turned to the edge of Bay 12 and glanced down the hallway. Two nurses stood talking to a taller man in what looked like a security uniform. Zimmerman immediately recognized the security man.
Matthews,
he muttered under his breath. He watched as they were all deep in discussion. The older nurse was pointing down the corridor in the direction that Saffron went. He realized he needed to act quick. He turned to Bullard, still out unconscious on the trolley. He took a tube syringe from his pocket and injected it into Bullard's arm.
Sorry about that, young man.
Bullard began to thresh uncontrollably. Zimmerman called out,
Can I have some help in here, please?
He repeated it, but this time louder. Nurse Fuller appeared at the opening of the bay.
Problems?
Yeah, I think it may be a chemical reaction.
Bullard shot upright, his eyes wide open, still threshing.
Do you have any strong guys around? He may need holding down?
Yes.
Nurse Fuller turned to her desk.
Matthews, may I have your help, please?
Matthews appeared at the Bay 12 opening and saw Zimmerman trying to hold Bullard down. Both Zimmerman and Matthews struggled, but eventually succeeded in holding down Bullard.
Nurse, in my right-hand pocket is a tranquilizer. Could you administer it, please?
Nurse Fuller fumbled inside Zimmerman's coat pocket and extracted the tranquilizer. She armed it and then administered into Bullard's, still struggling, arm. Within a few seconds, his threshing began to subside until eventually he was back in a controlled sleep. Matthews eyed Zimmerman suspiciously.
What's wrong with him?
Zimmerman stared him straight in the eyes.
I don't know. That's why I brought him here.
Matthews nodded. Nurse Fuller studied the egos of the two men clash. She rolled her eyes.
There'll be a doctor along soon.
Zimmerman nodded towards Fuller.
Thank you.
Matthews left the cubicle. Nurse Fuller followed. Zimmerman smiled. He knew Matthews and he knew that he may be a Xylos employee at this present moment in time. But he also knew Matthews had one major weakness, one major flaw. Zimmerman went to the edge of the bay and watched Matthews and Fuller interact for a moment. He was out of earshot, but he could tell they were talking about him and Saffron.
Matthews spoke in a low tone so as to not be overheard.
I know that guy. He's some kind of mercenary.
Nurse Fuller went about her work signing into a computer terminal.
So, there are a lot of mercenary types on this rock, Matthews. Doesn't that account for 99% of us?
Maybe, but I don't trust him.
I don't trust anyone.
She looked at Matthews, smiled and moved off to attend another bay. Matthews watched her go. He pulled out a key card and went to a side door elevator. Zimmerman watched and smiled. He whispered into his covert comms unit.
Can you get out without being seen?
There was no answer. Saffron had escaped the restroom without being seen and was now stood in front of a row of CCTV screens in the security room. A security guard lay unconscious on the floor.
I'll try,
she said as she watched on a screen the shadowy figure of Matthews walk out of a side door of the hospital and enter a camouflage double door in the ground of the hospital compound.
Okay,
Zimmerman replied.
I'll see you back at the transport.
Okay.
Saffron nodded. Zimmerman took a look out of his bay. Matthews had gone, Nurse Fuller was obviously busy, and there was no sign of a doctor. He took out a small adrenaline syringe from his inner pocket and jabbed it into the comatose body of Bullard. Bullard immediately awoke, blurry-eyed.
Time to go.
Zimmerman exited the bay, moments later followed by a drowsy Bullard. No one noticed as the pair silently and effectively vanished out of the double doors and into the back, the waiting transport.
Saffron hacked into the CCTV system and deleted all the data. She then took out 2 small circular devices from her pocket and placed them strategically in the heart of the system.
Moments later, 2 very small, almost orally undetectable small explosions blew, disabling the CCTV system completely. She dropped to one knee, checked the security guard was still unconscious, and quickly and quietly exited the room.
Zimmerman's hut was bathed in the red glow of the planet's sunset. Saffron looked at Zimmerman with a little incredulity.
It depends how committed to the cause you are.
Piss off.
Saffron laughed.
What cause are you committed to?
My own. And you?
I have principles.
It was Zimmerman's turn to laugh.
Whatever your feelings, Saffron, we all share the same goal. With the Xylo's influence in this sector eliminated. It leaves the freedom for us all to prospect, mine and do business without totalitarian corporate uni-party control.
Saffron looked at Mackenzie, who stood silently listening.
You know I wouldn't ask you to do this.
But you are though, aren't you?
Well.
Mackenzie paused and smiled.
No.
Saffron gave him a look.
But you are asking me to do this?
Mackenzie shook his head. Saffron looked to Bullard. He still looked dazed.
What do you think?
What?
Do you think I should do this?
Do what? I'm sorry, but...
Bullard turned to Zimmerman.
What the fuck was in that stuff?
Just a little cocktail of mine.
Jesus. I've had some banging hangovers before, but fuck.
Zimmerman and Zinchenko shared a look and grinned.
Don't worry, Bully. I got another little cocktail that'll get you back.
Bullard shook his head.
No thanks. I think I'll just sleep it off.
Zimmerman smiled.
Suit yourself.
All their attention turned back to Saffron. Saffron rolled her eyes.
Well, as a famous philosopher once said, I have principles, and if you don't like those...
I have others.
Saffron finished the sentence, and she glared at Zimmerman.
You better be fucking right about this Matthews' weaknesses.
Oh, trust me. Everyone has their Achilles heel.
Zimmerman pushed a small computerized console across his table towards Saffron. She picked it up.
You can hack keys with that.
A red morning glow seeped through a blinded window, illuminating Matthew's snoring, sleeping face. He was awoken by the sound of trousers being slipped on. Bleary-eyed, he viewed the figure of Saffron getting dressed.
Leaving?
I gotta work.
Don't have to leave yet, do you?
He said, smiling. Saffron smiled, flaring her eyes in naughtiness.
You got plenty of energy, haven't you?
You're quite energetic yourself.
Really? But I gotta keep some of that for work.
She smiled at Matthews, winked and left. Matthews watched her go, looked at his watch on his table, sighed and went back to sleep. The console was pushed across Zimmerman's table. Zimmerman grinned. Saffron didn't.
Well done.
Zinchenko laughed, but Bullard managed to suppress his.
Are you okay?
Mackenzie looked towards Saffron.
Oh yeah, terrific. I always love shit sex.
Means to an end.
Zimmerman logged into the console.
Good. Anything else you managed to learn? I mean specifically towards getting into the underground bunker, that is.
Saffron shrugged.
Only what we know. They don't know what's happened to Yallop. Matthews is filling in as security head.
Zimmerman nodded.
Can't beat pillow talk.
So how did you know he wasn't gay?
He's bisexual.
Oh? Cheers.
I would have sent Zinchenko, but someone shags him. We've got a dangerous lunatic on the loose.
Oh, cheers.
Zimmerman winked at Zinchenko.
Only joking, gorgeous.
The hospital doors opened. Matthews, a little bit sleep-deprived, shuffled in, his hair disheveled.
Heavy night.
Nurse Fuller tapped away at her computer terminal.
Lack of sleep.
Really? Lucky boy.
I'm the consummate professional, nurse.
Fuller smiled.
Really?
Matthews gave a sarcastic smile and moved towards the elevator and pressed for the unmarked lower level. Exiting the elevator to the underground bunker, he went to the inner door and tried his electronic key. Nothing happened. He looked at the key. Tried it again. Again it failed, and he took out his communication, and Hanley answered the communication.
Forgot your key, Matthews?
No, it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, I'll be along shortly. Stay there.
Matthews waited. He ran through his mind the previous 2 days' events. Could things get any stranger? The door opened, revealing Hanley. He held out his hand. Matthews handed him the key. Hanley ran it through a portable console checking device.
There is a malfunction, Matthews.
It worked yesterday.
Hanley nodded, contemplating the possible reasons for the malfunction.
I'll get it checked out. They may have just given you a compromised key.
Matthews entered the bunker and the doors closed behind him. Hanley and Matthews began to negotiate the winding bunker complex.
Any instructions?
We're waiting on intel.
TVT still active?
Not as far as we can ascertain.
They reached the operations room and Hanley entered the code. The door opened.
Any news on Yallop?
Hanley looked at Matthews.
No, it's still being looked into.
The two men entered the operations room. Walker, Kudasini, and Defoe were seated at their consoles, each in front of their respective screens. The screens were actively scanning the hospital grounds in CCTV security mode. Meanwhile, the droid's mode was on standby and not operational at this time. Matthews views the crew.
Hello, people. All quiet?
There was a hint of faux enthusiasm in his voice, which all three operators picked up on. Kudasini said nothing, but just looked up and then returned his attention to his screen. Walker smiled and nodded acknowledgement, and Defoe returned the faux enthusiasm.
Hello, Mr. Matthews. How are you today?
I'm good, Defoe, and you?
Defoe nodded.
Locked, cocked, and ready to rock, sir.
There was more than a hint of irony in his voice, which Matthews noticed, but totally concurred with his lack of genuine zeal.
Yeah, aren't we all?
Defoe and Matthews shared wry smiles. Hanley noticed, but chose to ignore it. His attention was soon attracted by an incoming call. Head of operations, Dennings was Xylo's company through and through. She lived it and was a total Uniparty paid-up member.
There's a call you might want to acknowledge, Matthews.
Matthews turned to a communication desk Hanley was standing at. The screen lit up and Dennings' face loomed into view.
Matthews?
Yes, ma'am.
You need a full debrief. Get to Yallop's office and call me back, immediately.
Yes, ma'am.
The screen went blank and Hanley grinned at Matthews.
Your lucky day, Matthews. She's in a good mood.
Yeah, as always.
The operators were all trying to suppress smiles.
Good luck, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Defoe.
Matthews waved his hand over a console and the door to Yallop's office opened. He moved inside and started up the console and a huge screen on the wall lit up. Messaging on the screen read, "Calling Head of Operations." The call was answered and once again the head of Dennings loomed into view.
Hello, ma'am.
Dennings cut straight to business.
No one has seen sight nor sound of Yallop. We can only surmise he must have been compromised.
Not necessarily.
Shut up, Matthews, and listen. Has there been anything unusual happen that you've noticed?
Matthews shrugged. Then he paused.
Do you know of a guy named Zimmerman?
No, but then I wouldn't. Ask Hanley, he's been around the block. He knows names and faces.
Okay.
From my intel, we have all but wiped out any competing rivals in this sector. We need the resources from those mines, Matthews. All you gotta do is stay frosty, very calm, and keep an eye out. It's not fucking rocket science, you know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Good, don't fuck this up, Matthews. This is important. We are all but there. The TVT Corporation are on their fucking knees in this sector, and bar from a few prospecting pirates, it's ours for the taking. Don't fuck it up.
No, ma'am.
And ask Hanley about that guy you mentioned, just to check.
The screen clicked off. The call was over. What a fucking bitch, mused Matthews.
Yes, I know him.
Hanley said as Matthews stood with him in the operations room.
Surly, slippery character. Always fancied himself as a bit of a freelancer. You know, gun for hire to the highest bidder. Know what I mean?
He was in the hospital yesterday with an injured man from the mines, but was then gone as quick as he appeared, without being seen.
I see.
Hanley nodded as he contemplated the information.
Your key, you never let it out of your sight at all, did you?
Hanley looked deep into Matthews' eyes. Matthews shook his head.
Never!
Hanley nodded, not really sure whether to believe him or not.
Well, we shall have to keep a lookout for our Mr. Zimmerman, just in case he's up to no good.
Should I tell Dennings?
Hanley smiled.
I see she's got you dancing on red-hot coals, has she? Well, I don't think we need to bother her ladyship right now. Do you?
Matthews shook his head.
Not if I can help it.
Zimmerman watched as Pucks drove the forklift tractor and loaded up the mutations containers into the transporter. Zinchenko joined him.
Do you think they're suspicious?
Probably, wouldn't you be?
Why do you think they're going along with it?
They're on their knees. I think Mackenzie knows the game is up for them, but he's a stubborn bastard and won't admit defeat. The TVT Corporation just haven't got the resources anymore.
Makes you wonder why they haven't pulled out.
Zimmerman nodded.
They probably have. They just don't want to pay off their employees. Like any corporation, expendable collateral damage is cheaper for the shareholders in the long term.
Zinchenko snorted a derisory, sarcastic laugh.
And they say we're scum. You could almost feel sorry for Mackenzie and his crew.
Almost.
Matthews stood in the hospital CCTV room, looking at the blank screens. Nurse Fuller stood with him.
How long have they been out?
Since our visit from your mate Zimmerman.
Well, he never came anywhere near here, did he? Coincidence?
Fuller shrugged.
At first, we just thought that it was a malfunction. But when the repair guys came, they noticed the whole system had been tampered with.
Oh.
I told you there was a woman with him. She disappeared too.
What did she look like?
Again, Fuller shrugged.
I don't know. About 5 feet 5 inches, slim, long auburn hair.
A cold chill of realization surged through Matthews. That description sounded familiar. Surely not. It would all tie in, though. The key not working, Zimmerman's appearance. Matthews mused to himself that he would keep it to himself right now. Self-preservation.
Okay, what about the data stick?
It's been wiped.
Matthews nodded.
Oh.
Oh.
Why?
Fuller smiled and shrugged again.
You're the Xylo security man, Matthews.
Matthews looked at Fuller, feigning incredulousness.
Don't treat me like an idiot, Mr. Matthews. I may be a nurse, but I know the situation. As far as I'm concerned, you're all to blame and you're all the same.
Matthews looked at her and was a little lost for words.
Aller, get one on our guys to fix the CCVT.
Apparently the parts have had to be ordered.
It's okay, we have our own.
Are you expecting trouble?
It was Matthews' turn to shrug.
We haven't heard any real intel as yet.
Fuller nodded.
Do you know how many innocent people work here and are being treated at any one time in this hospital, Mr. Matthews, including children?
No.
It can be up to 400 minors, minors' families, auxiliary staff, nurses, doctors, etc., etc., etc. So I hope not, I really do.
Who do you think pays your wages, Nurse Fuller?
Nurse Fuller snorted derision.
Shareholders don't give a fuck about me and you, Mr. Matthews. They only care how much debauchery and hedonistic perversion they can afford on their luxury yachts back on the world.
You're very cynical, Nurse Fuller.
Hard-earned experience, mate. There are two kinds of people in the universe. Matthews, believers, and realists. Believers believe in ideologies that drift in cloud cuckoo land. And there are realists who know the real truth of how the world turns.
Matthews laughed.
Wow. I bet you're all laughs out on the town weekends, aren't you?
Nurse Fuller looked at Matthews blankly.
I work weekends, Mr. Matthews.
With that, she left. Matthews blew out his cheeks. What on earth had he got himself into now? Hopefully it was just a coincidence and it would blow over. Hopefully.
Mackenzie looked Zimmerman straight in the eyes as he sat, feet on his desk in usual. I'm the king of the castle mode.
What if they send out for reinforcements from one of their mines?
Zimmerman smiled.
We've thought of that.
Zinchenko interjected.
It would take at least 30 mins for any reinforcements to arrive. That's if they were able to send any messages out.
Yes, Pucks will not be going with us at first. He will be in the transporter with a drone scrambling all outward communications.
Saffron, arms crossed, was unimpressed.
How do you know that's going to work? And what about the hospital staff?
I agree.
Zimmerman dropped his feet off the desk.
But Pucks has that in hand too.
Zimmerman grinned.
The prison transporter rolled along the highway through the built-up area made up of the portable homes of the miners, auxiliary staff and dependent families. As the transporter moved out of the built-up zone and towards the distant departure terminal of the planet's travel sector, Silhouetted against the red sky and the misty haze that covered the atmosphere, the passengers seemed oblivious. Goldstein was dozing, Westwood restless and fidgety, Edwards focused and watchful of the ride, and Stoker puffing on a stimulant inhaler. Not strictly company compliant, but no one cared. The driver was an old guy, not at his peak of powers, but still capable. Up ahead, an occasional vehicle shifted in the opposite direction from the interstellar travel terminal. Probably new or seasonal workers returning from some much-needed R&R. The driver's concentration was beginning to lapse, but there was only another 45 minutes to reach their destination. Many scenarios were drifting through Westwood's overactive mind. The main one being, how the fuck was he going to get out of this one? He looked towards Goldstein, who was now snoring. A lot of fucking good he was. Stoker sensed Westwood moving and turned to check on him. Westwood noticed and smiled.
Are you okay there, Stoker?
Better than you, Westwood.
Make you feel good, does it, Stoker, sending an innocent man to his death?
You ain't innocent, Westwood, and you ain't been sentenced yet?
As good as.
Judge may be sympathetic.
I haven't met a uni-party judge sympathetic to anything but cause yet, Stoker.
That Stoker couldn't argue with. Everyone hated the uni-party bullshit. A person just had to hope they were on the right side of the divide, because if you ever ended up on the wrong side, you were most definitely fucked. Stoker returned to looking front, not seeing the look of cold, pure darkness in Westwood's now unsmiling eyes. The driver's mind was drifting a little and did not really notice the driverless buggy taxi traveling in the opposite direction. At first, the driver just assumed it was carrying workers from the terminal on the way to the accommodation area of the mine. But as it got closer, it soon became apparent it was on the wrong side of the expressway and heading straight for the prison transporter. No one noticed, not least the driver, as the light from the nearby red sun was beginning to dwindle, making it difficult from a distance to judge where headlights of incoming traffic were coming from. Only Westwood and Edwards noticed first, and Edwards was too slow to react, as the buggy taxi careened straight into the front of the prison transporter, causing the transporter to leave the highway, turn on its side and crash straight into a high bank running adjacent to the expressway. The driver, who had not been wearing a harness restraint, had smashed his head on the windshield and had caved his skull, killing him instantly. Edwards had flipped over the front barrier and was laid unconscious on the window, which now lay flat against the ground. Stoker had fared better, but had cut his head badly on a stanchion and was dazed. Goldstein, who had been fast asleep and consequently received no injuries, apart from grazed wrists from his restraints. Westwood had managed to get himself into a crash position and successfully negotiated the crash in full working order. He called to Goldstein,
"Here, Goldie, get the keys!"
Goldstein shook his head and quickly came to his senses. With his foot, he tried to reach the keys on the belt of Edwards' prostrate body, but he couldn't reach. Edwards had been propelled too far.
I can't reach.
You're a fucking liability, Goldstein.
Yeah, well, I've been watching you, Westy baby.
Westwood laughed.
Keep trying.
Stoker was slowly coming to his senses.
Fuck it!
Westwood cursed. Just then, the double doors to the transporter, which were now facing the sky, wrenched open and the pockmarked, chubby face of Pucks leered through the opening.
Jesus wept. The fucking devil himself!
Westwood remarked, trying to suppress a laugh.
Hey, Westy. I bet I was the last person you were expecting to see, no?
Pucks, you old bastard! No! You were the last person I was hoping to fucking see.
Oh, okay, Westy. I'll go and you never see my beautiful face again.
Pucks, you get your fucking arse in here now and get these fucking restraints off.
Nice to see you too, Goldie.
Just fucking get in here.
Pucks jumped down from the door. Westwood indicated with his head the dazed but recovering Stoker. Pucks viewed Stoker and grinned.
Hey, Stoker, how you doing? Good to see you again.
Blood oozed from Stoker's cut head, blinding him in one eye.
Go to hell, Pucks.
Puck's grin dropped.
I'll see you there.
Pucks pulled a gun from a hidden shoulder holster and shot Stoker point blank through his forehead. The body of Stoker fell back, and Pucks grabbed the keys from his belt, and then leant over and grabbed the keys from Edward's belt.
Now what do we behold the pleasure of your dubious company?
I've come to save you.
You ain't the charitable type, Pucks.
Okay, I scratch your back and you scratch mine.
Both Westwood and Goldstein stared blankly at him.
Okay, you don't want my help. I'll be seeing you boys later.
Pucks turned to leave the transporter the way he got in.
Okay, Pucks, whatever you say, but just get us the fuck out of these cuffs.
Pucks turned back and went to place the keys in the cuffs.
What's the deal here?
Yes, why do you want to save us?
I don't.
Goldstein and Westwood shared a look.
That sounds ominous.
Don't it just?
You don't have a lot of time.
Pucks indicated an alarm beeping at the front of the upturned transporter.
Be about 5 minutes, I reckon, before the Gestapo get here.
What about money?
You'll be caught out here in the open. Try the hospital.
Why?
There's a lot of people work in the hospital, easy to get lost. Lots of modes of transport parked outside, and a safe full of valuables and money.
Listen to him. He's trying to play us like a bloody fiddle.
Yeah, Pucks, do your own dirty work.
Pucks shrugged.
Maybe I'll just leave you here.
I wouldn't try it.
You're wasting time, boys.
No worries. I'll just stay here if you don't mind.
Westwood leant back in his seat. Pucks smiled.
Suit yourself, but I know a few benefactors who can arrange for flights back to the world and freedom in certain circumstances.
Oh yeah, bollocks.
What do we have to do, Pucks?
What you're good at, causing havoc.
Oh, really? In the hospital?
Pucks indicated the warning light again. Westwood grinned.
What's in it for us?
Pucks grinned. Goldstein eyed his imprisoned buddy and smiled.
You're a heartless man, Pucks. You know that?
Pucks went to leave and then stopped by the bodies of the prison guards and stopped to grab their stun batons. He threw them towards Westwood and Goldstein.
You might need these.
Nurse Fuller stood at the main desk of the hospital reception, busy working on a terminal. The main doors opened and Westwood and Goldstein entered. Goldstein was feigning injury and Westwood was supporting him towards the main desk. He was carrying a big medical bag over his shoulder. Fuller immediately suspected trouble. She had been around a while, and her instincts for disreputable characters was razor sharp. She stepped up to the new arrivals, but not before she had pressed the alarm for security.
Yes, how can I help you, gentlemen?
Mining accident, nurse.
Really?
Yes, straight up.
Goldstein was trying his best to look convincingly injured.
Ah.
Now. Goldie, my old buddy. You hang in there, the nice nurse will soon get you fighting fit again.
Fuller was trying not to show her disdain. She pointed to the far end of the emergency unit.
Bay 6.
Will the doctor be along soon, nurse?
Maybe. Are you planning to stay long?
Now, nurse. Do I detect a little bit of scorn?
No, you don't, sir. You detect weariness from a long shift. Bay 6.
She reiterated and pointed again to the end of the emergency unit. Westwood nodded and helped the pretending Goldstein to Bay 6.
The forklift moved the containers to the back of the large transporter. There were 6 containers. Mackenzie looked at the smiling Zimmerman and a cold, icy finger ran down his spine. Mackenzie mused. This guy was borderline insane.
I thought you said there were only 4.
Well, I'm erring on the side of caution.
Overkill, you mean?
Saffron interjected.
Always best to keep a little something up your sleeve. In reserve, Saffron.
Really?
Zimmerman shrugged.
Well, you know, cards on the table, there's 2 in each container.
6.
How many did I say originally?
4.
I was never much good at maths. They must have multiplied.
Or biology, by the sound of things. I thought mutations were genetically modified, not bred.
Zimmerman shrugged.
Who knows, I'm only a mere prospector.
Is that all you are?
Oh, Saffron, don't be so judgmental.
What if one of your little mutations escapes into the hospital, where there are innocent women and children?
Unlikely.
but possible.
A famous freedom fighter once quoted in The Fight for Independence, "Any price is worth paying. It's all a matter of survival."
Is that how you see yourself, a freedom fighter?
Yeah, and you? What are you fighting for?
I don't think I know anymore.
Anyway, I always like to keep a little something in reserve.
Matthews exited the elevator into the hospital emergency area and made haste to Nurse Fuller's terminal.
They still here?
She turned to face him.
Day 6. I thought it best you saw for yourself. Maybe you can pretend to be a medical man. See what you think?
Matthews smiled.
I'll do my best, Nurse Fuller.
Matthews turned on his heels and then immediately turned back to Fuller.
Bay 6?
Fuller pointed towards the end of the ward. Matthews moved swiftly to Bay 6 and entered. It was empty except for a medical bag propped up on an examination bed. He opened it and immediately stepped back, momentarily struggling for breath. Matthews stepped out of the bay and called Nurse Fuller over, and she left her post and joined him.
What's wrong?
They entered the empty bay.
No patience, nurse, but there is this.
Matthews unzipped the bag, and inside was the bloodied head of Yallop, Matthews' predecessor. Nurse Fuller stared at the head.
Oh, good job I called you then.
Yes. Any idea where these patients might be?
Fuller shook her head. Just then the power shut down, immediately bleeping alarms and amber emergency lights sprang into life.
That's all we need.
Fuller looked to the heavens.
Power outage?
Yeah, how long before you lot go into lockdown?
Minutes.
How long will the backup power in the hospital last?
About 2 hours, I think, before life support systems and such like go down.
Not good.
No, unless it's temporary.
Matthews looked towards the bag with Yallop's head in.
I'm not sure what to expect, I'm afraid, Nurse Fuller.
Knowing you lot the usual crock of shite and a lot of so-called collateral damage in the name of profit.
You're very cynical, Nurse.
Fuck off to your little bunker, Matthews, and I'll try and not let too many people die.
Is there anything I can do?
Yeah, I just told you fuck off.
Matthews looked at her for a moment and an idea suddenly came to him. Nurse Fuller was just about to storm off to her duties when Matthews stopped her.
I have an idea.
Is that supposed to alleviate my anxiety, Matthews?
No, but it may help.
Fuller nodded thoughtfully.
I'll believe that when I see it.
She continued on her way.
Matthews entered the underground bunker. Lockdown had still not been activated, but the emergency power and lights were on. A low-level klaxon sounded out all over the complex. He ran to the operations room. Hanley had a cabinet open and was issuing small firearms to the 3 operators. Walker looked a little anxious.
I haven't used one of these since training.
You are supposed to keep up with 5 hours training in every 12 months, Walker.
I must have forgot. I meant to, but never got round to it.
Hanley nodded.
Too late now, Walker.
Yes, sir.
Why haven't we locked down yet, Hanley?
Been waiting for you, sir. You are our commander, sir. Or had you forgotten?
Lock down the bunker, Hanley. Now.
Yes, sir.
Hanley moved to the main terminal and started the lockdown procedure. Cudicini and Defoe armed up, trying to help Walker refresh her training. Matthews scooted out of the operations room, down the corridors to Yallop's old office, and fired up the communications screen and sent a call to Dennings. It took a full minute and a half for her to answer. She did not look pleased.
What is it, Matthews?
We've lost power and are on lockdown, ma'am.
Yes, I know.
I think the hospital has also been compromised.
So?
Well, can't we help?
Not our responsibility, Matthews.
But surely it's in our interest for it not to be under threat.
Why would a power cut mean it is under threat, Matthews?
There are undesirables on the loose.
Matthews, what the fuck are you on about?
I have reason to believe the hospital has already been compromised, ma'am.
Have you really?
Yes.
And why?
The head of Yallop was left in a bag, left in an emergency bay.
Dennings went silent and conferred with someone off-screen. She came back to face Matthews.
You better not be sending my guys on a wild goose chase, Matthews.
I just think it's better safe than sorry, ma'am.
Okay, I'll check with our security advisor to see what we can do and if we can send someone out to the hospital.
Okay, ma'am.
There was no response from Dennings. The communication screen just clicked blank. Matthews took a moment to collect his thoughts. He watched from Yallop's terminal monitor as the complex became fully locked down. He breathed a sigh of relief, but then looked at a 3D movement tracker on a desk in the corner of Yallop's office. It showed 10 entities of a foreign nature in the complex. He was in the process of closing in on their exact positional coordinates when the backup battery power went dead. All the computer terminals went blank. The only light was an amber emergency light in the corner of the office. All communications inside and outside of the bunker were also dead. Just then, Matthews was jerked out of his contemplative seizure with the sound of shouting, small firearms fire, and the screams of agony emanating from the operations room.
The mutation had jumped from the bunker's aluminium air conduit and was now in the corner of the operations room. Cudicini was screaming in agony as his arm had been completely sheared off by the mutation's bloodied mandibles. Hanley was coordinating fire from the other two operators towards the mutation. Walker was struggling to stay in control. She was not used to actual physical combat. Controlling droids and drones with a remote controller was her skill, and she was bloody good at it. But this, she had no actual live experience of tangible combat. Defoe had already fired off one magazine, but was only able to hit his target on one occasion. The mutation was fast and agile. Hanley turned to the weapons cabinet just as the mutation fired formic acid from its stinger straight into Defoe's eyes, blinding him. He fell to the floor screaming. The mutation was ready to pounce as Walker hesitated, but Hanley had acquired a high-powered assault weapon and fired off several rounds at the mutation. The mutation amended its original intentions, and nursing its wounds sprang back into the air ducts and scuttled away. Defoe still howling in pain, Cudicini now drifting into unconsciousness, Walker beside herself in distress. Hanley lowered his weapon, relieved. Matthews burst through the door.
That was nice timing, Matthews.
Hanley quipped.
What the fuck happened?
Genetic mutation, I'd hazard a guess. The ultimate fighting machine.
Did you kill it?
I doubt it.
Where the hell did it come from?
Walker was struggling to control her emotions.
A professional soldier needs to stay cool and thoughtful in times of stress, Walker.
Oh yeah, I'm a droid operator, not a grunt.
All part of the same trade.
Need to tell Dennings.
All communication is down along with the power, Matthews.
What do we do?
You're the operational commander, Matthews.
Matthews nodded.
I'm asking my operational deputy his opinion, Hanley.
Well, we need to find out what we're up against, don't you think?
Without power to use the CCTV or the heat sensors, how would we do that?
Well, Mr. Matthews, if the operational commander was to have done his due diligence and homework, he or her would know that in former operational commander Yallop's office is enough battery backup power to power the 3D heat map.
Backup power went dead?
Yes, but did you plug in the backup battery to the backup battery power located under his desk?
Matthews nodded.
I knew that.
Of course you did, sir.
Hanley said ironically.
And I take it you are also aware of the communication system in place when the power is down.
Matthews stared blankly at him.
The traditional voice pipe facility is used in shipping since the 16th century, sir.
Oh yeah, of course I did.
Yes, of course you did.
Hanley smiled.
Located on the far wall of former Commander Yallop's office?
Matthews smiled and nodded.
Good, I can see we are in good hands then, Commander Matthews.
Matthews ignored the man's obvious sarcasm and turned to leave.
If it is all possible, Commander, we need to get a message to the hospital for backup security.
Matthews nodded.
I have a feeling they may have problems of their own.
Oh, that may prove problematic.
Yes.
Matthews disappeared out of the door back towards former Commander Yallop's office. Hanley watched him go, shaking his head with the pessimism that this was not going to end well.
Goldstein looked at the array of broken equipment that lay across the length of the control desk of the newly repaired CCTV equipment. Everything was now a mess of broken debris and electrical conduit torn to shreds. He stood back and admired his handiwork and nodded. When it came to breaking stuff, Goldstein was in a league of his own. The security guard that Saffron had left unconscious was now unconscious again, only 30 minutes after returning to work. The fresh new parts that Matthews had replaced were now again in pieces. Goldstein smiled. This better be worth it, he mused. Westwood entered the canteen after relieving a now unconscious doctor of his scrubs. He sauntered to the front of the food acquisition area as if he was the head clinician of the hospital on a lunch break. A young man, bedecked with an apron, smiled and inquired after Westwood's luncheon needs.
"What do you recommend, young man?"
He said in his politest voice. The attendee hesitated.
"Sir, we are not serving. There is a power outage."
"But I'm extra peckish. I've had a hard day. Don't you know?"
"I'm sorry, sir, but..."
Just then, 2 security guards entered the canteen, big, burly, and looking for Westwood.
"Oi, you there!"
One of the guards yelled at Westwood. Westwood ignored him. The canteen attendee indicated the security men to Westwood.
I think they want you, Dr. Sir."
"Oh, but I haven't had my dinner yet, Sonny."
"Oi!"
The guard shouted again. This time Westwood turned to face the men. His polite joviality was replaced with menaced rage.
"Are you talking to me by any chance?"
The security guards approached Westwood with every intention of apprehending him. Westwood had already worked out a plan to deal with these 2. They were big but out of shape, and he doubted if they had much experience with dealing with real head cases like him. As the first guard made a grab for him, a dinner plate was smashed in 2, and the sharp edge was implanted directly in the guard's unsuspecting face. A little stunned, the second guard hardly had time to see or react to the tray of cutlery that cracked into his face, momentarily distracting him as Westwood laid into the guard with an array of well-placed punches. The first guard was on his knees, screaming with agony, and the second guard was dazed on his back. Westwood turned to the now scared boy restaurant attendant.
"Have you no tasty sandwiches to take away there, young man?"
Matthews searched under Yallop's office desk and found the battery back up. He plugged it in, and the 3D map lit up again. The figures had moved and were now spread all over the complex. Matthews then moved to the wall along the far end and looked up and down, searching it. He smiled. He had found the old-fashioned voice pipe, took off the cap and blew down it. After a few moments, a voice on the other end echoed through the tube. Matthews spoke into the tube.
"Hanley?"
"Yes, who were you expecting?"
"There's multiple signals, spread all over the complex."
Hanley took a moment to answer.
"Yes, well, we may be under attack again, so I think if you can make your way back, sir."
There was a yell of fear in the background. Matthews listened as various sounds of weaponry and yells seeped through the tube. Matthews checked his own weapon and quickly exited Yallop's office. He hurried down the corridor to the operations room and halted when before him 2 mutations were battering the door of the operations room. Mandibles flexed. Matthews quickly ran the dilemma through his head. What the fuck now? He looked at his handgun. He figured if Hanley's assault weapon had not killed a mutation, then his small arms fire wouldn't have much effect either. He retreated back in the direction of Yallop's office. One of the mutations must have sensed him because it turned to pursue him.
Fuck!
Matthews knew he couldn't outrun the bloody thing. So what now? He turned, crouched on one knee, and just hoped the handgun would at least scare the atrocity off. The mutation hurtled round the corner of the corridor facing the sweating Matthews. The handgun had 2 functions, automatic or semi-automatic. Matthews had it on automatic with the idea of short, sharp bursts to try and ward off the abomination as much as the idea of killing it. But Matthews mused that maybe, just maybe today, he might be lucky for a change. A short, sharp burst made the mutation screech in pain and halt momentarily. Matthews backed up further, still a good 10 yards from his destination. The mutation screeched again as it fired formic acid from its stinger, narrowly missing Matthews, only catching his left ear.
Fuck!
Matthews yelped that fucking hurt. Matthews clicked the empty clip from his handgun and loaded another clip. He switched the gun to semi-automatic and aimed single shots at the beast's antennae. The sodden thing kept moving. Finally, it caught one, and the mutation screamed in agony. Matthews took his chance and ran for the door of Yallop's office. The mutation, now raging with vengeance, pursued him. Matthews reached the door, and the mutation was almost upon him. While running, Matthews had switched mode on the gun to automatic and turned just as he reached the door to fire off the last of his clip into the mutation's eyes. It worked. It stunned the repugnance just enough for him to get through the door and lock it after him. He breathed heavily as he heard the mutation pound relentlessly at the office door.
Hanley, Walker, the injured Cudicini, and the blinded Defoe were not faring any better. Hanley had almost exhausted all of his ammo, and Walker's aim was erratic at best. Another mutation had worked its way through the aluminium air conduit and was dodging the fire of the operations room personnel, all the time aiming formic acid from its stinger at the Xylos operatives. Walker, having exhausted her ammo in frustration, first threw her weapon at the mutation, and then picked up a fire extinguisher, activated it, and aimed in the general direction of the abomination. It momentarily became confused as the ice crystals from the extinguisher coated its antennae, and the mutation immediately disappeared back from where it came, into the broken part of the aluminium air conduit.
Nice work, Walker.
Hanley gave her a comforting smile. She leant heavily against the wall and dropped the extinguisher to the floor. She was cooked.
Puck sat in the controller's chair in front of a row of screens in the back of the transporter. Zimmerman stood at his shoulder. They watched a combination of body cam footage from Zinchenko, Saffron, Mackenzie, and Bullard, and a 3D mapping system that showed where everybody and the mutations were within the Xylos underground bunker. Zimmerman spoke into a walkie-talkie on a frequency not jammed by the power outage.
What's the word, Zinko?
2 of the mutations are a little battle sore, minor injuries, but still chomping at the bit, so to speak, sir.
Operations room still intact?
Yes, sir, not breached yet.
Are our Tifty friends on schedule?
As far as I know, sir, Saffron and Bullard are planting the explosives, and Mackenzie is trying to control the other mutations attacking further into the complex, sir.
Okay, stay in touch.
Yeah, will do, boss.
Zimmerman looked at Pucks and pointed to an area on the 3D map.
That must be the operations room, where the droid controllers are.
I'm hoping so, Zim, because that's where most of the mutations seem to be attacking.
Zimmerman smiled.
Unless that's where they keep all their sugar.
The bunker walls seem thicker than we expected. What if the explosives are not effective enough?
They are. Bullies have radioactive vapor, which will flood the bunker's complete air conduit system and make it unusable for 150 years.
Pucks looked at the screens and grinned.
You are more devious than I ever knew, Zimbo, my old friend.
Zimmerman smiled wryly.
More than anyone would ever know.
Matthews blew down the voice pipe. It whistled at the other end.
Yes, sir.
Matthews was stressed, and it showed in his voice.
What the hell are we going to do now, Hanley?
Well, you're the Commander. You tell me.
Is there any way of getting communication to Dennings?
Well, if you were to rewire what's left of your backup battery pack to your communication console, then maybe. Depending on how much power there is left in your battery backup.
Right, okay. How do I do that?
Well, as the Commander, maybe you should use your initiative, sir. But we have a more immediate problem for you to solve.
What?
We are out of ammo. Walker used her initiative to use the freeze crystals in the fire extinguisher to stave off the mutation attack, but I'm not overly sure if A, that'll work again, and B, if there is much of it left.
Oh.
Yes, that is my thinking exactly, Commander.
Matthews made an attempt at irony.
Can't you use your initiative, Hanley?
I could, but if my immediate commander had done his homework before taking command, rather than fornicating with our adversaries, maybe he would know to let loose the dogs.
The what?
The dogs, Commander?
What goddamn dogs?
Really, Commander, you should make an effort to keep up with current events.
Just fucking tell me, Hanley.
Now, Commander, a professional soldier.
Hanley, what fucking dogs?
The half-droid, half-real dog. Hounds of hell, sir.
What?
They are real dogs enhanced with robotic ferocity, trained to guard the facility in the event of attack.
Where are they?
In a holding compound in our basement, along with extra weapons and ammunition.
Well, they're not a lot of fucking good down there, are they?
No.
How do we get to them?
How do you get to them, you mean?
What?
We are in no position to leave our operation room, Commander. So you will have to let the dogs loose. Or contact the hospital for extra help from their security staff.
How?
How what, Commander? You're the one that gets paid the extra social credits, Commander. You work it out.
Nice.
Oh, And Commander, don't forget you may need a torch, or even better. Yallop did have some night vision goggles for emergencies.
Okay, do you know where he kept them?
The voice pipe popped and Hanley had gone.
Son of a bitch.
Matthews closed off his end of the pipe and considered his options. Ripping the front panel off the communication console base, he looked at the power connection and then at the battery backup he had been using for the 3D mapping system. From the map, he could tell the mutation that had stopped battering into his door was still waiting outside. So if he was to try and call help from the hospital or let loose the droid dogs, he was going to have get past that, whatever he did. An idea clicked in his head. He looked at the battery pack and pressed a part of the casing which lit up a panel readout on it to test how much power was left. 75%. That was enough to cause a hefty shock to anything. Even a genetically modified mutation. Well, that was what he was hoping anyway. Sod Dennings, he thought. He had already told her the situation. It was up to her to react. Now where the fuck did Yallop keep his night vision goggles?
Dennings sat behind her desk playing with a widget toy. She was not in a good mood. Two men stood in front of her on the opposite side of her desk. Two strapping men in their early 30s, both experienced ex-military, now working as contractors. Both ex-special forces, both lean, mean fighting machines. Connors was 6 feet 2 inches and stocky with impressive muscle definition which showed through his tight black t-shirt. Davis was a little shorter at 6 feet and a little more wiry, but still imposing enough. Dennings looked at a screen on her desk. There was still no communication with either the hospital or the underground bunker.
I want no fucking around, you two. I want you to start in the hospital, sort it out, and find the power shortages.
She threw 2 computer key codes onto the desk.
Those will bypass the underground bunker lockdown. I want you to find out what the hell is going on down there.
Yes, I don't think that should be a problem. Is there any special instructions?
Yes, don't fuck around. Get in there, sort out whatever needs sorting out, and get out with as little fuss as possible.
Yes, you can rely on us.
Just get on with it.
Matthews had connected the battery pack to 2 wires. He temporarily touched the 2 wires together, and there was a mighty flash. He pressed the battery and the figures 69% flashed up. He smiled in satisfaction. He placed the battery on the office desk and contemplated his next move. He needed some way to hold the heavy pack and navigate the narrow, dark corridors. He took off his jacket, looked inside the office desk drawers and took out a pair of scissors. He cut off the arms of his jacket. At the end of one arm, he poked holes in the sleeve and took some office string and tied up the end using the holes he poked. He then placed the battery pack down the arm to the end of the newly sewn-up sleeve. He tested it for strength. It held. He then, with the scissors, cut down the arm and then cut halfway around, forming a long length of fabric with the battery pack. He then took the other arm, cut all the way down the arm, leaving 2 inches of connected fabric at the end. He then cut halfway round the arm to form one long length of fabric. He tied then end to the arm with the battery pack to form a sling, which he then hung it round his neck, leaving his 2 hands free to hold the wires, one in each hand to connect together whenever needed, to form a powerful electronic charge. He then used the manual override handle to carefully open the door. He waited. Nothing. He edged towards the door opening and sensed something was there. The mutation twitched, ready to pounce. Matthews edged a bit more towards the door threshold. He reached the opening and carefully peered round the door frame towards the mutation. The mutation, sensing Matthews, pounced. He quickly threw the wires together, using the mutation as an electrical conductor, and the abomination howled in agony and screeching. It disappeared up into the air conduits and scuttled away. Matthews breathed a sigh of relief and checked the power gauge, 39%. Not so good. That meant he only had enough charge for one more connection. He considered his next move. Go for help from the hospital security staff or let loose the droid dogs. Might be interesting to see how the dogs managed against the mutations, he mused in a twisted kind of curiosity. But how could he be sure they wouldn't go for him first? That little detail he forgot to ask Hanley.
Walker was just about keeping it together. She looked to Hanley.
We have to do something. We can't just stay here and wait.
What do you suggest? With Kudasini and Defoe in the condition they are in?
Shit happens.
Hanley looked to the 2 injured men. Kudasini was flitting in and out of consciousness and Defoe was still totally blind.
We lead Defoe out of here by attaching some sort of leash and lock Kudisini in one of the lockers and come back for him.
Might be too cramped. Can't guarantee he will survive.
Tough.
I suppose you may have a point. Staying here, we won't be able to stave off another attack. But how do you intend getting out past any of our uninvited guests?
Walker thought for a moment and shrugged.
Any ideas?
Yes, I have many, but without Matthews, no way of executing them.
He's a waste of space.
Hanley nodded thoughtfully.
That indeed may be the case, but at this present moment in time, he's all we got.
There must be something we can do.
Let me think a moment. If only we knew what our friend Matthews was doing. I confess I forgot to tell him how to activate the droid dogs.
That's helpful.
Hanley nodded.
Yes, well, a man of maturity like myself can't be expected to think of everything.
If he's our only hope, God help us.
Matthews was still conflicted. The chances are, he pondered, the security staff had probably enough on their hands anyway, with 2 unknown men on the loose in the hospital, and Dennings should be sending help. So he finally decided to head for the depths of the bunker for these so-called droid dogs, and surely there must be some kind of instruction on how to activate them. He would cross that bridge when he came to it. First he had to get there, so he held the electric cables out in front of him in readiness and descended towards the storage rooms of the bunker.
Bullard and Saffron slowly navigated their way into the depths of the underground bunker. They had no idea where they were going, and Puck's signal was now not strong enough to guide them. The thickness of the bunker walls were obviously thicker than Zimmerman had realized. Down here, the amber emergency lighting was growing very dim. Both Bullard and Saffron switched their headlamps on. Hopefully, the batteries would last long enough for them to plant the demolition charges and get out before they blew, if they could find their way back, Bullard thought, as no one has expected Puck's signal not to reach down here.
Whose fucking idea was this?
Bullard was not a happy man.
It's not my idea of fun either, Bully, but I don't suppose we had a lot of choice. Xylos killed 7. They wouldn't have thought twice about making us next and sealing all rights to the mining facility.
Yeah, but I can't help feeling we are just patsies for Zimmerman and whoever is paying him.
Saffron came to a door with maintenance storage written on it. She turned to Bullard.
Is this it?
Don't think so. We need the power bank room and the general storage room.
They might just call it something different.
Fuck it, we'll just plant some charges in here anyway. We should have enough.
Saffron nodded.
Yeah, won't do any harm, will it?
Won't do any harm?
Well, you know what I mean.
Saffron cranked the manual override handle and the door slid to one side, revealing a room in complete darkness. The pair slowly crept into the room all the whole time, using their torches to scan the room. Bullard halted when he encountered a large cage on one side. His torch illuminated a massive creature which seemed to be a dog. Its eyes were stone cold and stared straight ahead.
Here, Saf, come and look at this.
Saffron joined him, and her torch illuminated the rest of the cage. Inside, altogether, were 4 Rottweiler-type dogs. Only these were just a shade bigger and looked almost robot-like, but still with real flesh.
What the fuck are these?
They look like dogs.
Well, I know that, but what type of dogs?
Big ones.
That's what I love about you. You're a font of knowledge.
Just then, Bullard heard a noise outside in the corridor and silently shushed Saffron, and they both crept into the corner of the room, turning off their headlamps and hid behind a row of metal crates. A few moments later, someone or something entered the room. Saffron took out some pheromone spray and got ready to spray her and Bullard. But when Matthews cursed, "Fuck it," after hitting his knee on a metal box. Saffron nudged Bullard. Both were relieved it was just a man.
Matthews scanned the room, night vision goggles firmly in place. Seeing the cage, he looked inside at the intimidating dogs.
Jesus.
They didn't move, and they still looked scary. He ran his security tag over a panel. The panel opened, revealing a list of instructions and a small detachable handheld electrified tablet. Matthews ran his finger down the instructions, reading them as he did. The detachable tablet was to be kept on the dog activator at all times to ensure they are not attacked. The sequence of numbers and letters would illuminate on the panel when the start activation button was pressed. The cage would open and the dogs would wake up from their cryo-sleep state and reach a position of readiness. When this happened, the detachable tablet would give a unique code, which the activator would punch into a panel on the cage, and the droid dogs would become active and seek out any rogue elements within the underground bunker compound, except the holder of the detachable tablet. Matthews pressed the activate button and the dogs woke from cryosleep. All the dogs slowly became awake and instantly started to snarl and growl. Saffron and Bullard started to panic. What the fuck? The unique code appeared on the detachable tablet, and Matthews punched in the code and had all but the last number punched in when Bullard switched on his headlamp and slid out from his hiding place, making Matthews jump. Saffron peeled some plastic explosive from her supply and slipped a small detonator into it. She wasn't exactly sure why, but for some reason she just did it instinctively. Maybe it was the uncertainty that her assault weapon would not work on the droid dogs. Matthews and Bullard stared at each other for a moment in a kind of Mexican standoff. As if by some coordinated agreement, they both reacted at exactly the same moment. Matthews entered the last number in the keypad as Bullard fired off 2 rounds from his assault weapon. One round missed completely, and the other caught Matthews in the leg as he dived to the door, knocking off his night vision goggles and dropping the detachable tablet to the floor in excruciating pain. Bullard saw the tablet and made a dash to grab it as Matthews fumbled desperately to pick it up again. Bullard was too slow. The first droid dog left its cage and ferociously attacked him, the implanted metal teeth ripping his left arms to shreds and leaving him screaming in pure agony. Saffron had switched on her own headlamp and fired off 2 shots from her gun, hitting the dog squarely in the head, not killing it, but leaving it dazed. Matthews had found the detachable tablet and held onto it for all he was worth, as the other 3 dogs slowly exited the cage, now wary of attacking the source of the first dog's hesitance. This gave time for Matthews to crawl out of the door to safety, Saffron to drag Bullard by his jacket back behind the metal cases, and for her to unleash the small charge, throwing it in the direction of the first dog and detonating it with a loud crack and bang, almost splitting the first droid dog in half and scaring off the other 3, who all bolted out of the door in search of other targets. The droid dogs, even though hard as nails, were still half-organic dog, and though extremely fearless, had the instinct for fight or flight. And seeing the head of their pack torn asunder had computed in this occasion flight was preferable to fight. Matthews, still in pain and losing blood, staggered to his feet and tried to make his way back to Yallop's office. Saffron cut open the shredded sleeve to Bullard's mangled arm and surveyed the mess. Shit. The bone was showing, and even that was severed in 2. Bullard was drifting into unconsciousness. Saffron took out a dressing from her pocket and tried her best to dress the wound. It wasn't going to do a lot of good, but she still tried. She also took out a vial of Z Ultra painkiller and administered it. She laid him down and took his pack of explosives. She noticed for the first time the radioactive sign on his explosives and furrowed her brow. That wasn't on hers. She considered her next move. Sweat was rolling down her face, stinging her eyes. Place the explosives and come back for Bully. What else could she do? She edged out of the room and checked her plan. Find the communication power chamber, blow that, and that should destroy the bunker's capability to use droids or drones from under the hospital, and then blow the ventilation system. So find the 2 separate rooms and set the charges, get Bully and get the fuck out of there. She really needed Maka now. She checked her walkie-talkie, but no signal. The bunker walls were thicker than anyone realized. She closed her eyes to summon the drive to complete the task. She half considered just bugging out and calling it even, fuck it. Saffron was at the point of, whatever happens, happens.
A drone flew across the hospital and landed on the landing pad on the roof. Pucks inside the transporter watched. He turned to Zimmerman at,
"Can you fly the jamming drone nearer?"
"Will do, boss."
"Now how did they know? The jamming drone is working, I take it?"
"It should be. Maybe it's just routine."
"I hope so."
The Pucks-controlled jamming drone moved towards the landing pad atop the hospital. Pucks and Zimmerman watched as 2 men, obviously military men, probably contractors, extricated themselves from the rogue drone and ran for the hospital roof fire door.
"Do you recognize them?"
"No, can you get facial recognition at all?"
"I'm trying, boss."
The jamming zone's camera zoomed in on the 2 figures as they disappeared inside the fire door. Pucks had caught just a small segment of an uncovered face and enlarged it on the screen, running it through several facial recognition data checking programs. After a minute or so, there was success. The face and information of an ex-OWG Uni Party soldier, Kenny Connors, flashed onto the screen.
Do you know him?
Zimmerman asked. Pucks smiled wryly and nodded knowingly.
If that's Connors, you can bet your bottom dollar the other man is Davis.
Zimmerman nodded in acknowledgement.
Of course I've heard of them, but never seen them. Connors and Davis. Well, seems our retrobates, Westwood and Goldstein, have a bit of a fight on their hands if they ever want to see freedom back on the world.
I don't rate their chances now.
No, any way of rigging the game, Pucks?
Maybe I'll think of something.
Nurse Fuller stood leaning against a filing cabinet in the head surgeon's office. The head surgeon sat behind his desk. In front of him stood a smiling Westwood and a glaring Goldstein.
Now, what sort of transport vehicle do you think our friend here has, Westy?
Westwood picked up a triangular sign on the desk. It said, Head Surgeon Dr. Ramirez.
You see that, Goldie, head surgeon, no less.
I have no personal vehicle, gentlemen. You are mistaken.
Westwood turned to Goldstein.
Gentlemen?
I find that hard to believe, Dr. Ramirez, a man of such high skill as yourself.
Believe what you want.
What do you say, Nurse Fuller?
We all live at the facility quarters and use the passenger transport provided.
That's nice.
What do you think, Westwood?
I couldn't give a rat's arse, Goldie. I want out of here. Now I think these nice people here should give us the keys to working transport before we burn down their precious hospital with everyone in it.
That's murder. There are over 500 innocent people in this hospital that have nothing to do with your corporation greed and politicking.
Goldstein and Westwood give each other a look.
Our what?
I think you maybe have a misunderstanding of the situation here, Nurse Fuller. All we want is transportation out of here.
My friend Goldie here is right. Stick your corporations and politics up your arse.
Nurse Fuller has told you there is no personal transport on the premises of the hospital.
Westwood and Goldstein share another look.
How are you with electrical fires, Goldie?
Well, they don't call me the Twisted Fire Starter for nothing. Westwood, my old buddy.
Look how many more times we do not.
Westwood stops him mid-sentence as the sound of the elevator stopping and its doors opening can be heard from the office.
I thought the backup power had run out.
Goldstein listened and moved back away from the door.
How are elevators powered?
Are you taking the piss?
If the power is down, why are the elevators still working?
How the fuck should we know?
Westwood gets his stun baton ready and hides behind the door. Goldstein signals for Nurse Fuller to look out in the corridor.
Any bullshit. I'll break your neck.
Fuller goes out of the door and looks down the corridor. In front of her, Connors and Davis stand, weapons at the ready.
Are you alone?
Nurse Fuller flared her eyes and lied.
Yes, can I help you, gentlemen?
Connors gets her message and nods for Davis to hang back.
Okay, have you seen 2 escaped prisoners up here?
Again, Fuller flared her eyes.
No, it's only me here, and the patient's in Ward 7.
Behind the door, Westwood listened intently. He shared a look with Goldstein. Goldstein shrugged and looked at the doctor. He pulled out a knife, moved behind the surgeon and held it to his throat. In the corridor, Davis backed up to a bend in the corridor, dropped to one knee and took aim at the door Nurse Fuller had just exited. Connors nodded towards the door and Nurse Fuller flared her eyes as if to say yes. Connors took a moment to consider his options.
Okay, nurse, we will try the next floor.
Connors signaled to Davis and he opened the elevator door. Pretending, made a sound of scrambling into the elevator and then shut the door. Westwood looked towards Fuller and angled his head in a quizzical, "Do you think I'm fucking stupid" kind of way.
They're gone.
Westwood, still suspicious, gestured for her to re-enter the office. She did as she was told. Connors and Davis stood silent and still, awaiting their opportunity. Slowly, he withdrew a stun grenade from his top pocket and then stopped as a high-pitched whizzing sound started to emanate from the far end of the corridor. Connors mouthed, "What the fuck is that?" As a small compact drone rounded the bend in the passageway, it gave a new dilemma to Connors and Davis. It was obvious this drone was malevolent, but to react would alert the two prisoners, whose reaction was unpredictable and maybe put the nurse in danger. Connors and Davis shared looks. If anything happened to the nurse, they could always put it down to collateral damage.
Puck sat at his screen in the transporter and carefully controlled the drone down the ward corridor. Zimmerman had a wry smile on his face as Connors and Davis could be seen on the drone camera.
"Well?"
Pucks asked.
"Just hold your horses a moment. Let's see what they plan to do."
Connors watched the drone as it hovered near the end of the corridor. Inside the surgeon's office, Westwood and Goldstein shared looks and smiles. The tension was exhilarating. What next? Westwood grabbed Nurse Fuller and held the stun baton to her head. Connors and Davis shared a knowing look. It wasn't ideal, but they both knew what they had to do. They surged towards the door. The mini drone flew towards the two elite soldiers, and both Westwood and Goldstein put their hands over their ears, opened their mouths wide and closed their eyes tight as the suspected stun grenade arrived through the door and bounced off the wall before executing its flashbang. Ramirez and Nurse Fuller were momentarily stunned, but Westwood and Goldstein reacted quickly. Goldstein grabbed the surgeon to use as a shield between him and the incoming combatants, and Westwood, hiding behind the door, pushed Fuller towards the other side of the room and readied his stun baton. Connors took what he thought was his opportunity to rush the door and fired off a quick burst from his assault weapon, which instantly shredded Dr. Ramirez and Goldstein behind him. The drone flew into Connors and blew up in his face, detonated by Pucks remotely. Davis, showered by debris and parts of Connor's head, was angered and rushed into the surgeon's room and was instantly hit with a significant charge from Westwood's stun baton and flew back against the wall opposite the room. Westwood took his chance and ran for the door and down the corridor in haste and in hope of finding his way out and some transport.
Mackenzie watched as the mutation climbed into the air ducts. He was just a block away from the operations room and checked his walkie-talkie. There was a signal, but decided not to check in with Zimmerman as he was still unsure how the land lay with the Xylos operatives nearby. He listened as the mutation scuttled along the air duct towards the operations room, when an aggressive, ominous growl came from behind him. He turned and instantly thought, "Fuck." Before him was a hideous dog with snarling metal teeth. The moment's hesitation he experienced before bringing his assault rifle to bear was fatal. The dog was upon him and ripping him limb from limb. The screaming resonated through the bunker complex corridors. Hanley and Walker heard it in the operations room. Zinchenko heard it as he prepared two mildly injured mutations for another attack, and Saffron heard it as she placed two charges in the communication transmitter operations room. She knew immediately the vocal timbre of the scream. It was Maka. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh of resigned despair. She was a mining operative on a mining colony. Why the fuck did people have to die so some international banker back on the world could boost his already excessive wealth and probably have an extra sex slave on his yacht? She almost without recognition primed the detonator and quickly exited the room. Only one more charge to fit. Billy's one with the radioactive symbol on. She was past caring what the symbol meant and what devastation it would cause.
Westwood ran down the emergency exit stairs and charged through the double doors on the ground floor and immediately stopped. Right in front of him was a huge board attached to the wall with a plan of the hospital. Aware that Davis would be right behind him, he quickly scanned the board. The transport requisition and travel room was at the back end of the hospital on the ground floor. He knew that bitch Fuller and the surgeon were lying. He quickly scanned the corridor and found an industrial vacuum with a hard canvas hose. He took the hose and wrapped it through the pull handles in the door to delay Davis. Just as he finished his handiwork, Davis was on the other side of the doors, desperately trying to get through. He even fired bolts from his assault weapon, which only created splintered holes in the door but missed the canvas hose. By this time, Westwood was scooting down the corridor in the direction of the transport area. He careened through another set of double doors and found two hospital ambulances and a staff transporter. Quickly, just taking it for granted that the ambulances would be faster, he looked around for the office or controller's room, whatever may have the keys in. Davis had successfully got through the double doors after finally hitting the canvas hose and was trying to work out which way Westwood had gone. Westwood had found a working set of keys for one of the ambulances and was just about to drive off when he considered his first idea of just smashing through the transport warehouse doors might cause too much damage to the ambulance. He exited the driver's seat and ran to the warehouse doors, looking for some sort of switch to activate the doors, when a thought entered his head. He was not blessed with a lot of time, as Davis could soon work out where he had gone, and maybe something diversionary could be implemented. After all, the more trouble, the more diversions, the more Pucks and his employers would be willing to reimburse him for. He smiled. He liked burning shit down, and he'd never burnt a hospital down before. People back on the world were squeamish about that sort of thing, but they thought nothing of hundreds of thousands, and sometimes millions, dying in wars fought only to benefit military arms dealers' bank accounts. At what point was self-preservation no longer a crime, and, he mused, he never intended to hurt anyone, just survive? Davis was becoming more raging by the second. He was going to catch this bastard whatever it took. He had searched several wards and exits to the hospital, but nothing. He stopped to catch his breath and then went through his head. What would he do if he was in Westwood's shoes? And then it hit him. Get the fuck away. Transport. Fuck yeah. He looked at the hospital plan on the wall. Transport requisition and travel room. Got it. He raced down the corridor to his new target. Westwood stood back to admire his handiwork. The fire blazed. The assorted industrial rubbish that had been laying about the transport office was enough to fuse with the electrical systems to cause an overload and start a small but very fierce fire. The battery power backup cells had had just enough juice in them, and it was only a matter of time before the whole hospital would go up, especially with the sprinkler system deactivated. Surely various hospital staff would spend a significant amount of time to put it out, hopefully enough time to ensure he got away. Westwood mused this would leave Davis a dilemma of letting the hospital burn and a lot of innocent people to die or go after him. Now it wasn't guaranteed that Davis would do the right thing, but the odds were he would. Hopefully, for everyone's sake. Within seconds, Westwood was in the cab of the ambulance and driving through the open double doors of the transport warehouse, just as Davis appeared behind him, guns blazing. Davis fired off several shots, some missing their target, some hitting the ambulance, but missing Westwood, but two found their mark. One went through his seat and lodged itself in his chest, puncturing his lung, and the other splattered into the back of his skull, killing him instantly. Westwood's body slumped forward, and the ambulance swerved sharply and smashed into a combination of metal post and wall, coming to an abrupt halt. Davis heard the crackle of fire and scanned the transport warehouse for its source. It was raging, but containable. He grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and doused the blaze. Luckily enough, Davis had got there in time and was able to stop it spreading.
Zinchenko observed the two mutations before him. The results had not been as effective as anticipated. He stood near the entrance to the bunker, and his transmitter still reached Pucks and Zimmerman in the transporter.
I have a feeling this ain't all going to plan, Zimbo.
Zimmerman stood at Puck's shoulder in the transporter, looking at all the data on the screens before him.
What's the condition of the mutations?
Not overly good, but still able to function. There's still some ferocity there, but one's lost an antennae and another has lost a leg.
Zimmerman nodded frustratingly.
Terrific. What about the charges?
I've lost contact with Saffron, so I don't know. A short while ago, I heard Mackenzie scream, which didn't sound good.
You'll have to leave the mutations where they are and go looking for Saffron and Bullard to make sure they place the charges.
Okay, boss. Will do.
Zinchenko checked his assault weapon and clicked on his night vision goggles and began to traverse the bunker's corridors, looking for Saffron and Bullard. He'd only turned the corner to descend the steps to the lower part of the bunker when before him stood a raging, waist-high dog with snarling metal teeth.
Fuck!
Was his initial reaction, and he quickly retreated back round the bend in the corridor. The two mutations left behind him quickly sensed a living organism not sporting favorable pheromones and sparked their hostile instinct for danger into action. As the droid dog appeared around the corner, it jumped at Zinchenko, but the two mutations, though injured, instinctively attacked the droid dog. The mess of screeching and screaming in agony was deafening as mutation and droid dog intermingled with mandibles, razor-sharp tooth and claw, formic acid and the flash of blade from Zinchenko's knife as he slashed and cut at the dog. He figured not to use his gun for fear of hitting the mutations. Within moments the battle was over and the carnage was evident. The droid dog lay dead, as was one of the mutations. The other was now seriously injured. Zinchenko was uninjured, but breathless. Zimmerman called through the transmitter and Zinchenko answered.
What happened?
A fuck-up, that's what happened. One mutation down the other, incapacitated.
How?
Fuck knows. Some sort of dog. Not totally organic.
Zinchenko stared at the carcass of the droid dog, flesh, blood, metal, and microchips. Zimmerman stood perplexed as he rubbed his head.
Not in the plans,
he muttered. Pucks turned to him.
What now?
Zimmerman shared a look with Pucks and spoke into the communication transmitter.
Find the other two and see if the charges are laid, and if they are, then get the hell out of there. We'll fire the charges from here.
Okay, boss.
Zinchenko clicked off his communication, sheathed his knife, checked his assault weapon, and adjusted his night vision goggles. Right, here we go again, he mused to himself.
Hanley had a smile threatening to break out on his face. He'd heard the commotion outside the operations room and now reveled in the silence. It almost certainly meant the droid dog had been successful. He turned to a confused Walker.
I bet the bastards weren't expecting that.
Is it over?
I doubt it, but we still aren't aware of the size and motivation of our adversaries.
What do we do now?
Wait.
Davis searched the hospital wards. He was looking for Nurse Fuller. The unrest among the patients was palpable, but nearly all were miners, auxiliary workers, and families. They were stoic, hardy, and able to remain calm in the face of adversity. The remaining staff were doing all they could under the conditions of no power and rapidly dwindling backup power. Davis descended stairs to the reception area and found Nurse Fuller at her post, carrying on with her work, deploying and designating staff to help where they could.
Well?
She inquired.
All done. Restore the power, and you'll be back to normal.
Easier said than done, soldier boy. They destroyed our generator room and power converter.
Davis studied the nurse for a moment. He took out the keycard Dennings had given him.
No backup generators in the bunker?
Yes, but it's still in lockdown.
Davis showed her the keycard.
I'll go down there, see what I can find.
Good luck.
Do you know your way around down there?
Fuller shrugged.
Sort of. Why are you worried about getting lost?
Davis smiled.
I'm afraid of the dark, Nurse.
Really? That's a shame, soldier boy, 'cause I ain't never been able to see in the dark.
Davis handed her a pair of night vision goggles.
Regular Boy Scout, aren't you?
Davis nodded thoughtfully.
Yeah, they were Connors.
Your mate?
Davis nodded.
I'm sorry for your loss.
That's why I want to get these bastards.
Nurse Fuller grabbed the night vision goggles.
How do you turn them on?
Zinchenko viewed the mess in front of him, time to find Saffron and make sure the charges are set. He backed up to the now locked-down side entrance and unclipped the container containing 2 final mutations held in reserve. He pressed a button on the side of the container and tapped in instructions that enabled a sensor which would activate and open the door if it sensed movement within the sector. This included the operations room and would trigger if anyone tried to leave. The mutations stirred and crept to the end of the container, ignoring Zinchenko due to his pheromone spray, and waited eager to get out. Adjusting his night vision, he started to negotiate the corridors in the search for Saffron.
Hanley and Walker both stood in complete silence, listening, waiting and watching the broken aluminium air ducts. Nothing. No sound, no cracking metal signifying another attack, and no ramming at the door. Cudicini was still unconscious and Defoe was sleeping, sedated by Walker.
What's going on?
Hanley looked towards Walker and shrugged.
What about my plan?
It's best that you wait here with Cudicini and Defoe, and I'll see if I can turn the power back on and find our friend Matthews.
What if they come again?
I doubt very much if I could resist another attack any more than you could, Walker.
Walker nodded, but she was still struggling to keep it together. She still gripped the fire extinguisher, firmly acting as much as a comfort than a genuine means of defense.
No more power cells? At least we could get the data analysis and CCTV screens back up and running for a while.
Hanley checked his assault weapon. It was empty.
Maybe have a look in all the lockers. Under all the junk, there might be the odd one.
He checked his sidearm, 2 rounds left.
I won't be long.
Hanley went to the door, hesitated, and then turned back to Walker.
If you do find any power cells, check the outdoor compound. Look for irregular transport. You know, unusual medical vehicles, that sort of thing. The bastards must have got here somehow.
Walker nodded an okay, and Hanley opened the door and edged his way out, checking if the corridors were clear.
Davis and Nurse Fuller descended the steps to the lockdown entrance to the bunker. Davis flipped out the keycard Dennings had given him. He slotted it into the side panel, and a small Judas door cracked open. The pair slipped through, and the door closed behind them.
How do we get out?
Nurse Fuller whispered.
Use the keycard I gave you in the same way.
Fuller nodded an okay.
What now?
Show me the power maintenance room. They should have a small portable generator that should be enough to power the whole hospital till you get repaired.
Powerful for a portable generator, then?
Old school nuclear.
Got no idea what you just said.
That's okay. Just show me the way.
I'll try.
Nurse Fuller judged her surroundings and took her time, as it was the first time she had ever worn night vision goggles. She carefully moved off towards, what she could remember, was the direction of the power maintenance room.
Walker was becoming more anxious by the minute. If only she could watch the CCTV screens and view the data analysis, it would ease her disquiet. She woke Defoe, who had drifted into sleep to nullify the pain in his eyes. He was grumpy from being awoken and was groggy.
What's happened?
Do you know if there's any power packs anywhere in the storage lockers?
Yes, there might be.
Where?
Defoe shrugged, turning his head towards her voice, even though he couldn't see her.
How's Cudicini?
Still comatose.
She looked towards Cudicini's inert body. There was a pang of guilt, but there was nothing she could do for him. She began to search the operations room for any power packs. In cupboards, drawers, and cases, she ransacked them all and finally found a power pack. She pressed on the side panel, and it fired up. She grinned.
Result!
After a moment, she plugged in the small backup power pack into the CCTV unit, and the main screen sparked into life. She used the directional controller to move the camera and scan the exterior of the complex.
What you doing?
Hanley told me to check the compound.
See anything?
She stopped on a transporter. It was an unusual transporter, not a conventional ambulance from any of the contractors on the mining colony.
Yeah, some sort of transporter. It's not one of ours, but it's got the decal of a mining ambulance, but not the look of one.
Use your droid to check it out.
She looked at Defoe and smiled, though he couldn't see it.
That is a fucking good idea, Defoe, my old pal.
The droids she operated had their own battery power and was still fully functional, but was too big to use in the corridors of the bunker. She fired up one of the droids, firstly to take her mind off her fear of another attack, and secondly to check out if the unusual transporter was related to the attack.
Saffron checked the hallway. It was clear. She crept into the room and immediately recognized the major transmitter server. This was the last destination for the last charge. Billy's charge with the radiation hazard warning on. Keeping her senses aware, she placed the charge and set the detonator. If this worked, it would make the bunker complex inoperable. She reasoned that's probably why this charge had a warning symbol on it. She hadn't been told, but then she was just a hired hand. God, how she was getting tired and pissed off with all this politicking corporation battle for resources bullshit. She was a mining operative, not a bloody soldier. She checked everything was in order and slowly got to her feet and exited the room. Now to get the hell out of there. She went from one corridor to the next, checking behind regularly for anything untoward. So far so good, she mused. Just turning the bend in the corridor, she stopped. Just in front of her was a droid dog. Growling, aggressive, and ready to pounce. She tried to edge backwards and raised her assault weapon, but she was too slow. The dog was upon her, and she lost all control, and her reasoning as it tore, shredded and ripped her limb from limb. She still had the detonator in her lapel, but neither had the time or the thought to detonate it. Even if she had reasoned it was a better way to go.
Matthew sat on the lush office chair in Yallop's office, his bloodied leg raised upon the desk. He had administered medicated repair accelerant on the wounds, and it was working its magic. The wounds were healing, and any foreign bodies inside were naturally coming to the surface and being repelled by the accelerant. This was amazing stuff. Matthews smiled. He knew he would be back on his feet in a very short time, though not fully recovered but enough to function.
Hanley checked the corridors. A mutation sat just away from the door, barely moving. He edged past it and turned the corner in the passageway to be confronted by the mangled dead bodies of another mutation and a dead droid dog locked together in an eternal life or death struggle. Gliding past the mess, Hanley headed for Yallop's office, but stopped momentarily when a strange death rattle drifted through the corridor behind him. Assuming it must have come from the nearly dead mutation he'd passed after leaving the operations room door, he carried on his way. The containers that Zinchenko had placed on sensor to open when activated by movement had indeed opened when Hanley had left the operations room. The death rattle that he had heard behind him was the stridulations of one of the released mutations. It had sensed Hanley and was moving in for the kill. Hanley had not even known it was there when it grabbed him from behind, and the mandibles crushed and tore at his quickly eviscerated body. The mutations had developed carnivorous appetites, and having been encapsulated in the container without food, the mutation, shortly followed by its container companion, began to devour parts of Hanley's dead body.
Zimmerman stood at Puck's shoulder and watched proceedings the best they could. They had now lost contact with Zinchenko, and the thick bunker walls were excluding any depth of 3D map analysis inside.
What do you reckon?
Puck shrugged.
We're going to have to go in and check, I reckon.
Zimmerman nodded contemplatively.
Fuck it.
He readied himself, assault weapon, spare ammunition, night vision goggles, pheromones, and portable stridulation module. He shared looks with Pucks.
Wish me luck.
Good luck.
Zimmerman grinned and exited the transporter. Pucks watched him go and turned back to his readout screens. Zimmerman slammed shut the door of the transporter and hunkered down, back against the side of the truck, and reconnoitered the distance between him and the hospital entrance. The problem was how to get into the locked-down bunker and what to do if he bumped into the two men who entered the hospital by the door, on the roof ambulance pad. There must be a way in somewhere. He banged his head against the side of the transporter. He hated not knowing what was going on. He had not taken into account the thickness of the bunker walls and the depth of the bunker. Now he would have to try and find a way in rather than just cross his fingers, wait and hope for the best. The coast seemed to be clear, so he decided to make a run for it.
Walker watched as her battle droid moved out from its resting place and into the hospital courtyard towards the transporter. The synchronicity of Zimmerman making a dash for the hospital and the droid moving into the open was unerring as Walker's built-up stress and rage rose to the surface to find the perfect outlet. She aimed the droid's armaments directly at Zimmerman, and without any hesitation or thoughts of checking out if it was friend or foe, she let rip. Shoot first, ask questions later. Zimmerman did not have time to react. The high-powered rounds slammed into his chest and head and killed him instantly. Walker let out a laugh of unrelenting relief, which quickly came to an abrupt halt when the sound of creaking and the distinctive mutation death rattle came from the broken air ducts above her. Her angst and rage from the unfairness of it all filled her with resignation.
You fucking bastards!
She yelled as one of the mutations that had slaughtered Hanley dropped down on her. Defoe, still blind, shouted out what the hell was happening. But the screaming drowned it out, and he was helpless and unaware of the danger. He felt around him for something to protect himself when Walker's screams stopped. He could see nothing, but the short wait for the inevitable pain seemed an eternity until it eventually came. Short, quick, and merciful. The mutation sensed Cudicini was still alive, but incapacitated, but not for long. He was swiftly dispatched.
Zinchenko moved slowly through the bunker complex corridors down a service ladder to a lower level. It was rank, damp, and oppressive. Searching its many alleyways, he soon came across flesh, blood, dog teeth, and remnants of humans and mutations. The human body was female, unrecognizable except for the ripped clothing and one of the boots. It was Saffron. Zinchenko sighed.
Fuck.
Zinchenko searched what was left of Saffron's clothes and found the detonator. It was charged and ready for detonation. Now he thought quickly about his next move. Check to see if the charges were all placed correctly or just trust that Saffron and Bullard had done their job. That was a point where was Bullard? He thought maybe a quick check before he got the hell out of there would probably be the best option, but before he could enact his decision, A much more pressing issue came into view. The last of the droid dogs had entered the corridor and stood before him, metal teeth dripping with blood. "Fuck checking the charges and bullet and just hope they manage to do their job," reflected Zinchenko. For a few nerve-shredding moments, Zinchenko and the droid dog stared at each other. Then Zinchenko, making a hasty exit from the corridor, fired off a few shots in the direction of the dog to stun it enough to stop it from giving chase. He made it to the service ladder to the next level, but ultimately was too slow. The droid dog grabbed him, its teeth digging deep into Zinchenko's leg. Zinchenko screamed and tried desperately to raise his assault weapon, but to no avail. The power of the dog was intense as it dragged Zinchenko off the ladder and endeavored to finish off the invader with no remorse, conscience, or delusions of morality. The detonator dropped to the floor, charged and ready for detonation.
Matthews awoke. He shook his head to clear his groggy mind. He must have dozed off, waiting for the accelerant to work. He checked his leg. It was as good as it was going to get, without proper rest and recuperation. Getting to his feet, he strapped up his shredded trouser leg and went to the voice pipe in the corner to contact the operations room. There was no answer. He tried again. Again, no answer. He wondered if they had either left or, even worse, he cursed. He had better go and check. A small part of him thought he would be better off staying where he was and waiting for Dennings to send relief, but the bitch would only stitch him up for not doing his job. So time to man up. He checked the power cell to the 3D mapping console, but it was dead and there was no more cells, not in Yallop's office anyway. So he was going to have to go out blind and hope for the best. He checked his assault firearm and cranked the manual lever on the open door panel in the wall of the office. The door opened. All was clear in the main corridor to the operations room. He stealthily back-pressed against the wall to help him stay upright and to maintain a defensive pose, navigated the corridor safely and stood pensively at the door of the operations room. There was the sound of movement inside. Walker? Defoe? He couldn't tell. After a few moments of contemplation, he cranked the manual lever to either open the door or indicate to people inside he was there if the door was locked. No answer. The door was locked, and no one responded to the lever crank. Shit, he definitely heard movement inside, or was it the air conduits? He decided safety first and hobbled as quickly as he could back down the corridor from where he had come. With the mutations so hypersensitive, would it have made a difference if he had kept his cool and quietly edged his way back to Yallop's office? Or even faced them off with his armament? It didn't make a lot of difference, as one of the remaining mutations dropped from a broken section of air conduits, traversing the length of the corridor, and quickly chased the hampered, faltering Matthews. Sensing the impending doom, Matthews' back to the wall blazed away at the mutation, but his panicked firing failed to hit its target, and the mutation was upon him and made short work of him. His screams were heard down deep in the bunker.
Fuller and Davis both heard it.
Anyone you know?
Yes.
Let's hurry.
Davis, firearm pressed to his shoulder, moved steadily through the corridors, guided by Nurse Fuller. He came to a junction and a service ladder and stopped, waiting for Fuller's next instruction.
Down and to the left, I think.
Davis looked down the service shaft to check if all was clear. It was. He slung his assault weapon and slid his pocket power module into the lift mechanism. They both climbed in the platform, and it slowly descended down the service shaft. Next level, Davis checked up and down the passageways and again held his armament at the ready. Fuller signaled down the corridor and to the right. The atmosphere was damp and dark, and Fuller's night vision was beginning to steam up. She tapped Davis on the shoulder, and he stopped. She took off her goggles and wiped them. She tapped Davis on the shoulder, and they started up again. The soldier scanned every nook and cranny for movement. He stopped at the edge of a doorway. He turned to Fuller. She shook her head.
No, next one along, I think.
Davis nodded and poised to move on, but hesitated. Something was moving just a little bit in front of him. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it moving. He edged very carefully and very slowly forward, moving round a bend in the corridor, and stopped as his foot nudged into something on the floor. It was a body. He knelt down to check it out. Whoever it was, they were dead. Fuller joined him at his shoulder.
What is it?
Must be one of the infiltrators.
Davis searched the dead body. It was Zinchenko, and found the fully charged detonator. He popped it into his pocket.
What's that?
Fuller inquired.
The detonator. That button gets pressed, the whole bunker will go up.
Hospital?
Davis shook his head.
Don't worry. Your precious patients will be safe.
He smiled and they moved on to another doorway. On the door a sign stood out, Power Maintenance Room. Davis moved inside and checked the various generators in the room. On the main generators and the communication power modules, Davis viewed the charges packed in. He took special notice of the radiation labels on some of the charges. He turned to Fuller and handed her his portable power pack.
Use that to power the service lift. You'll need it to get the small nuclear generator up to the hospital generator room. That should power the hospital for some time.
Fuller nodded an okay. Davis slung his weapon once more and dragged the small-wheeled mini-nuclear reactor out of its place, dismantled the charges on it, and then Nurse Fuller grabbed the pull handle and began to wheel it out of the room.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to stay here and dismantle all the charges. Some are radioactive, so if they'd have gone off, the bunker would have been unusable for over 100 years, if not more.
Oh.
Nurse Fuller was a little taken back.
Okay, well, how do I plug this baby in then?
She said, referencing the generator she was dragging. Davis quickly showed her how to start the generator up and told her how to connect it to the hospital generator room power cables.
Do you think you'll remember that?
She nodded.
Yeah, 1 or 2 of the orderlies know all about this sort of stuff. How long are you going to be?
About 30 minutes tops.
Okay.
Davis nodded and smiled. She gave a smile of knowledgeable reassurance back and began to drag the generator to the service lift. Davis shifted his attention to the charges that laid before him. He inhaled deeply and started his work.
Davis first watched and then listened as Nurse Fuller dragged the mini-nuclear generator down the passageway up the service lift and out. He refocused on the job in hand, to dismantle all the charges that had been set and try not to blow himself up. He began on the main one, the radioactive charge set on the communication and power module generator. If he could render this explosive useless, the bunker could well be saved and just need minor repairs. Leaning his assault weapon against a nearby wall and the detonator close to it on the floor, he dropped to his knees and commenced with a long intake of breath and a readjustment of his night vision. In the dark and silence, all he could hear was his breathing. But then there was something else. It was breathing, but a different kind of breathing, and it wasn't his. He turned towards the door, slowly trying to reach out for his armament. Before him stood a dog, with bared metal teeth dripping with fresh blood.
Fuck it!
It was too late. The dog was upon him with a ferocity unmatched by organic living creatures. There was no fighting back, no struggle for survival, only death.
The droid dog stood over the remains of Davis and sniffed over the dead body, and then exited the room. As it entered the corridor and sniffed around the dead body of Zinchenko, unable to know his body still oozed the pheromones of the mutations. But when first one and then the other surviving mutations dropped from the ceiling coursing air ducts, it could never have known the powerful effect pheromones played in the vengeful wrath of a mutation's instinct. A baring of teeth and a snarl of hatred had little effect of deterring or frightening a mutation, and within seconds all hell broke loose. Metal teeth, bloodied mandibles, formic acid stingers, and powerful ripping jaws all played their part in an unholy cacophony of organic hatred, rage, and violence. The results of nearly a minute of intensive power struggle left one dead droid dog, stung and mandible torn apart, one dead decapitated mutation, and one badly wounded mutation that limped away to find a secluded corner to die in.
As Nurse Fuller dragged the mini-generator into the hospital, she called an orderly over and told him to take the generator to the power maintenance room and link it to the main hospital infrastructure. The orderly looked a little confused.
I'm not sure.
Fuller rolled her eyes.
Don't worry, I'll show you.
With the power restored and the hospital back in full functional mode, the bodies of Goldstein, Westwood, Connors, and the doctor, all now on ice in the mortuary, any evidence of the day's tribulations was totally erased as if nothing had happened. Nurse Fuller was back at her workstation and looked at her watch. It had been an hour since she left Davis. That was strange. It took him only a few moments to disarm the charges from the mini-generator they were now using for power in the hospital. She checked her pockets and found the key card for the bunker. Should she go and check on Davis or just leave him to it? The emergency bays were all but empty and it was busy, but not overly. She called over to a fellow nurse and told her she would be back in 5. The nurse nodded okay. Fuller grabbed the night vision goggles and descended to the locked doors of the bunker, hesitated for a moment, shrugged and inserted the key card. The door opened and the damp, dark blackness and a strange stench of the inside made her hesitate again. But she pushed in, closing the door behind her. All was quiet, still, dark and dank. Fuller plugged in the portable power module and the platform descended to the lower section. There was an odor of something she hadn't noticed before. Formic acid. She continued on, reaching the dead body of Zinchenko and something that resembled a dead dog and something otherworldly. She shivered. What the fuck had gone on here? She edged into the room, the last place she had seen Davis, and froze as she saw his dead, mangled body on the floor. She let out a sigh of compassion. He seemed like a nice guy, too. She went to leave, but then noticed the detonator sitting beside Davis's assault weapon. She shrugged and picked it up. After relocking the bunker, she returned to her workstation and continued her work as if nothing had happened. She was used to death. The initial sadness she felt would soon dissipate, and she would function again as if nothing had happened. She placed the detonator on the desk and expected she would give it to the appropriate Xylos Corporation jurisdiction when they turned up. She mused to herself that they were a right pain in the arse, even if they did help finance the hospital. Still, it would be so much better if they weren't involved at all. She stopped her work and looked at the detonator. What had Davis said? If the charges had been ignited, the hospital would not be affected, but the bunker would be completely unusable for a very long time. Nurse Fuller grinned.
Who would ever know?
She looked around her. No one was taking any notice of her as they were going about their work. There was a certain degree of smug satisfaction in her smile as she let out a little.
Oops!
And the floor shook a little, but that's all as she pressed the detonator button. An orderly and a nurse nearby both stopped their work and inquired, "What the hell was that?" Then they shrugged and went about their work. Nurse Fuller could hardly contain her glee as a whole stream of endorphins coursed through her veins like a rush she hadn't experienced for years. She continued her work, but struggled to contain her upturn in mood.
With Dr. Ramirez dead and the other major doctors off duty and off-site, Nurse Fuller took it upon herself to be the representative of the hospital dealing with the corporation people. Reluctantly, but she at least had the satisfaction of knowing their time was done here. Time passed. The hospital was back to normal with no military bunker underneath. Pucks safely ensconced on a return flight back to the world with the blessings of very pleased benefactors. Pucks could never work out who they were and didn't care. The mining colony carried on as if nothing had happened. Corporations politicked. Politicians greedily dished out lucrative contracts in return for favors and generous reimbursement, and the corruption, greed, and tyranny continued unabated.
Out on the far sector of the outer reaches of the mining colony, there had been a terrible accident. 4 people killed and 16 injured, 4 life-threatening. The hospital emergency bays were overwhelmed, and Nurse Fuller was at her optimum, dispensing care, knowledge, and wisdom with equal regularity and measure. Dennings, flanked on either side by imposing security personnel, stood impatiently waiting for Nurse Fuller to finish delegating orderlies. Fuller knew Dennings was waiting, and was purposely making her wait. She hated Dennings and her type of corporate bullshit, but couldn't hide the satisfied feeling of getting one over the bitch.
Nurse Fuller?
Dennings said in her usual dominant superior tone. Fuller finished delegating and turned to face her.
I should imagine you'll be glad to hear that the bunker facility under your hospital has been officially closed permanently.
Fuller shrugged, hiding her pangs of blissful pleasure that surged through her body on hearing the finality of closure.
Makes no difference to me,
she replied deadpan.
So for the time being, you have your precious hospital back, Nurse Fuller.
With that, she turned and exited the building, with her cohorts in close pursuit. Nurse Fuller watched her go, smiled and stuck 2 fingers up in an abusive salute to Dennings' departure.
Good riddance, bitch!
The clear blue waves gently caressed the bronzed beach. The palm bristled lightly to the cool, refreshing coastal breeze as Pucks, bedecked in his body-hugging designer swimming attire and the best sunglasses available on the market, lazed blissfully on a lounger as an elegant lady served the finest cocktails to his lounge-side table. She smiled, he smiled back, and he rested his head back on the lounger, sipping on the drink. He always wondered how the other half lived, and now he knew. Suddenly all the corporate greed and narcissistic pleasure of the elites made perfect sense. He grinned. He had never realized how easy it would be to forget all those desperate people who struggled and fought to live their miserable, depressing lives from day to day. But now it all made sense. All that bullshit didn't affect him now, so why should he care?